welcome to the 2019 Budget Committee this morning. I don't have any regrets from anybody. I believe that Councillor Elgar is on his way. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest this morning? See none. Then any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding an issue on the 2019 Budget Committee agenda for today may appear before Council at its meeting on January 28, 2019 at 7 p.m. when the recommendations from this meeting will go forward for final consideration. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting. Any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the meeting. We have a busy agenda this morning. I expect that we'll be going to noon there, Councillor Elgar. And we have the first item is a consent item, is the municipal access agreements and proposed 2019 permit fees for communication companies. Are there any questions regarding this item? I see none. I have a motion, but first I'll call, are there any delegations regarding item number 1? I see none. Then Mayor Burton has moved this item. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. We have no confidential consent items. Our main discussion item this morning is the 2019 operating capital budget, the Commissioner presentations. Members of committee, you should have before you the slide deck. For the other council members, you should also have a copy of that slide deck before you. And Mr. Lalonde, I believe you're going to lead off. Is that correct?
Thank you very much. There will be 3 presentations this morning. I'll be leading off with the first one. There's a question period at the end of my presentation, and then Ms. Boasy will be doing her presentation with question period at the end of that, and then we'll be finishing up with Ms. Bell. So this morning I'm going to be presenting Corporate Services Commission to you. You can find more detailed information in your book. There are several tabs that are marked out. There's one missing from this slide. There's also tab 2 in Corporate Services, Political Governance, where some of the costs of the Clerk's Office are covered. If you turn to these pages when you have time, you'll see the department's key initiatives for 2019, so we'll give you an entire overview of the department, a brief description of each department. It will give you a selection of key performance indicators. I'll give you 1 or 2 this morning from each of them, but if you want a more complete look, you can go to the tab. A staffing overview, program services budget overview, budget changes, and finally the operating budget forecast. Corporate services mainly provide services to the corporation, so our main customers are the operating departments of the town. So we think that the 2 most significant budget markers, KPIs for our commission, are how we are measuring up in terms of staff versus the overall corporate staff, and in terms of budget against the overall corporate budget. So if you look at this graph, this shows that the percent of gross budget has been pretty steady over the last 4 years. So 2014 to 2018, it's the blue line. You can see a slight increase there, and I will come back to that, but I can tell you that that increase is due to a change in pricing for our information systems group. The model is changing from one where you buy the software and run it for as long as you can to one called software as a service, where the service exists in the cloud, and you pay a yearly or monthly fee for that service, and it tends to be more expensive than the old model. The lower line is the number of FTEs that we have mapped against the number of FTEs in the corporation, and you can see that that's pretty steady at 11%. Here is a selection, and I just picked one from each of the different departments, and you can see that They're generally pretty consistent. Meetings in open session, we could only get measurements for this year up until October. The charts have not yet been completed, but in October, meetings in open session were running at 96.5%. Increase in learning from our learning management system. Most people express satisfaction after they've taken a course. About 83% of the people who take a learning management course say they have learned something from the course, they've improved their skills. The full life of assets achieved is a kind of an interesting one. We're mapping in our asset management how close we're coming to the full life of, the full predicted life of the assets that we own. If you look back in previous years, you'll see that the number for 2017 was higher. It was about 90%, and that is because in that period between when we put the statistics together for the last year's presentation and this year, we've gone back and we've made changes to our assets. So there were 3 projects that caused the number to go from 90% down to 72%. There was Great Lakes reconstruction that saw some assets coming out of service before their full life, so we could do some replacement of the facilities there. Oakville Arena and the surrounding park. So we took facilities out of the surrounding park when we rebuilt Oakville Arena, so they did not match their full life expectancy. In Oakville Park, where we had a washroom facility, the washroom was taken down. So that's what has made that change. And it will be interesting to see how the 86% that we're tracking for this year changes as we go through the next year, and those files are updated. Under audit, we've had a clean audit every year since 2014, and we're anticipating a clean audit this year. Network availability. Network availability, if you look at the last column, we've got 3 nines, and that's been a long time in coming. So 99.9% is a pretty good number. It can be better. We do have some room to improve. We can go to 99.99, but I think we're all fairly proud of that. And under stabilization reserves, we're at 20%, and the GFOA says that a good benchmark is 17%, so we're above the GFOA benchmark. Turning to 2018 accomplishments, good governance. The first bullet is that we ran an election this year. Some of you will be keenly aware of that. Most people don't realize what a large effort an election is. It takes about 2 years to plan an election. The work starts in getting the equipment and the machines and so on together about 2 years in advance. And the clerk's office hires more than 500 people to man the polling stations during the election. So it is a very large undertaking to run an election. We administer MFIPA and FOI requests, and I'm told by our legal department now that the standard operating procedure in municipal litigation is to file an FOI request just as an opening start. So our FOI requests have been getting a lot of attention. The requests sometimes run to tens of thousands of pages. So it's not just a minor thing. The Glen Abbey FOI request was many bankers' boxes of documents that we sent out. So these are very time-consuming, important, and sensitive that we are dealing with. I put in the amount of tax collected. I just thought it might be a surprise to you to see that the town actually collects about $0.45 billion in taxes. We collect taxes for the school board, we collect taxes for the region, so we take it all in through our revenue department, and then we disperse it afterwards to the region and to the school board. But that's a very large amount of tax that's coming into the office, and there's an infrastructure to support that. Under commitment to staff, we've always had a superior learning management system, but we're making improvements to it. The recruitment process I've mentioned here is right now quite highly automated. So a lot of the selection and the early selection criteria for the students that we hire is totally automated. The assignment of computer accounts and so on is tied to the recruitment process. But this year we've been starting to use that data to develop profiles on our workforce, and it is making it much more quick for us to make these reports about what our workforce looks like and where we're waxing and where we're waning, and it will help us with our goal to try and build a dynamic and resilient workforce. Finally, we hired more than 1,000 part-time staff to fill in seasonal positions. There's really 3 staffs that work here, and so we've got about 1,000 people that work here on full-time contracts, like us. And then in the summer, we go out and we hire about 700 students to cut lawns, do park maintenance, and so on. And then when the summer is over, those people leave, usually to go back to school, and we go out and we hire another crop of about the same size to do parking guards or crossing guards, run the recreation and recreation programs, swimming, and so on. So there's a lot of people that are working their way through our Human Resources Department into other departments, and I just think it's a kind of a convenient way to look at it. We concluded 2 collective agreements, and in addition to the sort of the highlights, we managed to pay everybody on time, and we got our bills paid on time as well. Under fiscal sustainability, this year we implemented a municipal accommodation tax. There have been a number of developments with the asset management system. We're working towards a level of service framework. You will be seeing much more of this in the coming years. I think that the asset management program that has been legislated by the provincial government is probably one of the most significant initiatives to come along to the municipal sector, maybe ever. The province is trying hard to make sure that as municipalities purchase and acquire assets, that they have a plan on how they are going to sustain them to the end of life. And I think it is a very important and significant program. And as I said, we'll be bringing that to your attention. We developed the 2018 DC bylaw. Who could forget that? It culminated, I guess, in, I think, February of 2018. It seems such a long time ago to me. And in a minute, I'm going to show you some examples of our ISO 37120, or World Council on City Data Information, that I hope is interesting to you. And we're now in the midst of our operating budget and our capital budget. Under innovation, we are continually making improvements to our information systems. We did do some very interesting lean construction for the Trafalgar Park revitalization project, and also for the Southeast Community Center. The lean construction program is fully blossoming at the town, and in fact, many of our construction projects are the object of attention from other municipalities. I'll be showing you some highlights of the demolition of the Oakville Hospital in a minute or two. I suspect that it's probably the largest demolition project to take place in Oakville ever, and I think that record might hold for quite some time. And we designed Fire Station 8. Under outstanding service to residents, we had a number of very high-profile litigations. Glen Abbey is clearly the obvious one. A lot of expropriations and acquisitions. Many of these are due to the Spears Road construction and the Kerr Street grade separation. There have been a number of properties that we've been acquiring for some time in order to make those things happen. The Bronte Outer Harbor, the harbor came to the town sort of as a matter of just as a practical matter. The region had owned the park for about 20 years. At the end of that period, practice is to transfer it to the local municipality. It came to us. The leases that the region was holding with the federal government for that land around the lake came to us, and as a result now we're in the process of working our way through the Bronte Outer Harbor and how that boat facility is going to continue into the future, and the Bronte Lighthouse Restaurant, there's work going on to figure out next steps for the Bronte Lighthouse Restaurant. Okay, so now we come to a technical highlight of this presentation. If it works, I'll be happy. There's no sound. I could sing for you, but I'll pass. This is the demolition of the Oakville Hospital.
Going down front. Wow. That's a good company. Is that cool? All the day by the hour.
That is what it looks like now. It's quite striking. So just a few words about it. I don't think the video really does justice to the magnitude of the project. It was enormous. There were machines in. I visited the hospital many times over the years, and you go in and you get a sense of a hospital. But when we were doing the demolition, when you actually go down into the bowels of the building, there were pieces of equipment down in there that were, I'm sure, installed in 1952 or 1953 that they just could not remove because they built so much stuff up around it. It was intimidatingly complex, and I have to say that the people on Allen Street, Reynolds Street, and McDonald demonstrated a great deal of respect or restraint as we went through this project. It was enormous. It was invasive. The end of that video where you see the machinery cleaning up the rubble, there was compaction going on. There was vibration going on. It was a significant and invasive process, and for the most part, people just took it in stride and got on with it. I'd now like to show you a little bit of information from our World Council on City Data. I put this in. We spoke about it as a highlight, and you know, it's really easy to know that we're doing it without going and looking at these things. So I put in 3 slides of data. So this, if you go to the World Council on City Data, so the URL is up there. It says opendataforcities.org. I highly recommend going and having a look at it. There's between 40 and 70 cities that are in this program. Not all cities contribute to all categories. So I think there's about 100 categories, and some contribute to all of them, as we do, and some contribute to some, as others do. So you'll see it's a little bit flexible. But there's a taste of the cities that are in the World Council on City Data. That's the opening screen. One of the ones that was most striking to me, I've gone through and browsed them, is if you look at the number of new patents that are held by citizens, Oakville measures 8 out of 49 cities that measure the number of new patents that come on. I don't know very many people that have actually created patents. There's 1 or 2 I think I know, and to me that's quite a striking event to actually create and hold a patent. And Oakville residents are claiming, they're in 8 out of 49 cities. And you think about, the centers of manufacturing and research, and there we are, number 8 out of 49. The second one, this will be no surprise to you, but our green area, out of the 58 cities that measure the green area, we are 9 out of 58. We have 1,457 hectares of green space per 100,000 hectares. And the last one is higher education degrees. And under higher education degrees, we stand second out of 48 cities. I would have thought that the large university towns would have been we would have been in that shadow. But I always knew that Oakville was, a highly educated community. But second out of 48 was a statement, I think, that the town is really punching above its weight. So if you have time, I highly recommend going in and having a look. It's really, really interesting. I just picked the 3 that are most interesting for me. But there's all kinds of stuff there about electrical disruptions, about quality of roads, emergency services, all kinds of stuff that you can see. For 2019, our key initiatives will be, we have a program that our CAO has mentioned. It's called the Leadership Program. There are 5 phases in the leadership program. There's continuous improvement, prioritization of needs, a dynamic and resilient workforce, understanding our existing and future communities, and planning and building infrastructure for the future. And the idea here is that as change is coming upon us, we want to have a framework in order to react to that change. We picked 2 for 2019, 2 of those 5 that we will be working on with some diligence. And the first one is building a dynamic and resilient workforce. And the second one is continuous improvement. There are 2 continuous improvement projects. One is the facilities review that I'll be leading, and the other one is the recreation review that Commissioner of Community Services is leading. Under construction, our construction program continues to be quite aggressive. So we will be working hard on the Southeast Community Center to bring it to close in 2020. We will be building Fire Station 8, and the council chamber renovation will be completed early this year. I have mentioned asset management already. The level of service framework is very, very important. It is a program that compares the resources that you're putting into the assets of the town. So, for example, it will be evaluating what level of service do we need for our assets. In parks, for example, they have gone through and they've evaluated, I think, 5 different levels of parks. Some parks demand more resources than other parks do. So we'll be working our way through that, which I think will have a significant influence on future budgets. And as I said, I think it's a very significant program provincially. We'll be working on the annual budget and the associated financial plan for next year. We have a number of systems that are coming to end of life. Our recreation systems, our clerk systems, these are all programs that we've been using for 10 or 12 or 20 years, and they're coming to end of life. And we are in the process of working through replacing them. The part that makes it most interesting is there are not a lot of contenders waiting in the wings for these programs. The municipal sector has been challenged by not having a large variety of software providers, and that continues on. So we'll be trying to be creative about replacing our systems as we move into our future. And finally, litigation within the developing LPAT framework promises to be a challenge to our legal department. Here you have our gross operating budget and our net operating budget. Corporate services does not have very many fees for service. There are some limited ones. So the size of the pie doesn't change much if you look at the gross operating budget or the net operating budget. Here is a breakdown of how the operating budget is split up, and as you can see, 69.3% goes to human resources, personnel services, and benefits. And a large amount goes to purchase services, so that would be consultants, outside legal, and so on. And here's a breakdown by department. Information systems is our biggest department, and then you can see the spread there. If any of you do the arithmetic, you'll find out that this doesn't add up to exactly 100%. There's rounding error in there, so it's actually 100.1%. And this graph shows you the overall changes year to year. So if you look down the list, most of these changes are due to contractual or salary changes of a couple of percent in most categories. As I've already mentioned, information systems is up because of the trend towards software as a service, which is more expensive than buying software and using it for as long as you can. Under program cost drivers, I just wanted to call your attention to a couple of the things that are driving costs up. The other commissioners will not be presenting this because it's consistent to all of us. But new facilities, well, clearly when we build a building, we have to staff it. So there's new programs that are going in, and there's probably going to be new staff to cover the number of square feet. But every new building we set up, we also set up a building maintenance reserve. And it's a best practice. The purpose of the reserve is to replace it when it comes to the end of life. Our formula is that you expect that the building will last for about 50 years. And we set aside 2% of the initial costs to fund that building over the period of 50 years. With the understanding that at the end of 50 years, there's going to be something left of the building, but the costs are going to be escalating every year. So it's a pretty reasonable formula. We also set aside maintenance costs for the building. So if you take a $50 million building, those two costs combine to about $1.3 million a year. So, I think that we pay for the building, it comes out of the budget, we don't have to carry a mortgage, and yet our costs go up by about $1.3 million because we have to prepare for the end of life of that building. The other thing is the energy footprint of those buildings is fairly significant. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say that on a $50 million building, you have energy costs in the range of about $700,000. It's probably a little more than that. But it rounds off nicely to about $2 million. So when we build a $50 million building, we're carrying a $2 million cost for that building before we put any programs in it at all. So that's one driver of cost. Complex projects. Our projects are getting very, very complex. If you go back not too far, the projects could be sort of concluded by a department. But if I take the OTMH project, this Southeast Community Center project, that project involved the demolition of the hospital, which I've just shown you, which was in itself very significant. It involved the design of the new community center, which was consistent or significant. It will involve the development of the build of the new community center and the severance and sale of lands around that. All make this really a truly corporate project. It's not just a project that any single department can handle. And clearly, as you get more people and more departments involved in projects, the level of complexity goes up. And we're seeing that over and over and over again. So that's a very large example. A small example would be the library the temporary library that's being built in up at 16 Mile facility. At one time, if you were building a temporary library, you've got a building and you put some shelves in it. The library has been designed to be shared, So during the day, it can work as a library, but when it's not busy, it can be used for community or recreation programs. So, I mean, it's the right thing to do. It makes perfect sense, but it makes the project more complicated. And we're seeing that in virtually all of our projects. Everybody's heard about tariffs, price indexes. Skill shortages is kind of a surprise. You know, for years people have been talking about the demise of skilled trades in Ontario. It's happening, and as a result, we're paying premiums for specialized skills. And litigation. When I say litigation, I'm sure most of you think about Glen Abbey, but we're finding that we're sort of entering a new territory where litigation is more common in things that were not common before. So contracts are quite likely to fall into litigation. It's just, I think we are a more litigious society than we used to be, and that's making its way into the work that we do. Looking to the future, I have 6 areas. I'm only going to speak about 4 of them because I already sort of spoke about continuous improvement, dynamic workforce. Our projects are becoming more complex, as I've said. We have uncertainty. Uncertainty is certainly partly due to fiscal uncertainty, but we're also operating in a period of legislative uncertainty. What is going to be coming down to us from the province is unknown at this point. We are given to understand that there are going to be changes, but we don't know what they are, and we're trying to plan and operate within that. I think uncertainty is also tied to the inherent challenges of being larger. The town is now more than 200,000 people, which adds a level of complexity to the things that we do just because there's so many of us. And cosmopolitan. If you go back to the World Council on City data, in terms of minorities, I think Oakville boasts about 35%, which is meaning that our libraries are looking to bring in new languages into them. In our recreation programs, we're looking at new programs. It's not just hockey and soccer and football. We're looking at isn't that awful? Cricket, thank you. Somebody said cricket. We're looking at cricket. I can't believe I did that. Oh well.
Pickleball. Yep.
Pickleball crosses all boundaries. Under divergence, I just use that label to talk about this idea of we're faced with new and unusual circumstances. Society is becoming increasingly litigious. I already talked about that, but I also think there's a less compromising attitude in the community, certainly in the negotiations that we have with our various contractors. The level of compromise is being replaced with, I'm going to fight until I get exactly what it is that I want. And I think that crosses many boundaries, and it adds complexity to all of the work that we do. Under fiscal pressures, I probably have already hit that pretty hard. We have competing priorities. We have operating costs for new facilities. We've got asset management, and we've got service levels that are increasing, and an inflation rate that does not match our issues. Under the capital budget overview, I'm almost finished, only a few more slides to go. This is a list of our projects. So the top of the list is hardware evergreening. The rest are fairly small compared to most of the projects that the town undertakes. But what is not in here is the cost of the large projects. So FCM, for example, builds the community center, but the budget for the community center is in another place.
Commissioner, can you just explain what hardware evergreening is?
Yeah, so we have essentially it's a good way to think about it is as if it was a fleet. So we have thousands of computers, thousands of telephones, thousands of laptops, and what we try to do is we try to replace those on a periodic basis. So what you don't want to do is let them all get old and then have to go out and replace the entire fleet. So you want to replace a small percentage of your fleet every year. This is our corporate services capital budget, and as I've already mentioned, it does not include the budget for the large facilities such as Southeast Community Center. Those are in another area. And this is our budget by category. Virtually all of our budget goes towards infrastructure renewal. Under growth is a very, very small element, and that is to put computers into the new facilities. So if there is a growth facility, we would put new infrastructure into that facility. That accounts for that 0.1%. And strategic priorities is mainly given over to web-related and accessibility-related activities. That concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions on this component of the budget? Councilor O'Meara?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Commissioner. I have a question with regards to the system replacements that you were speaking of, and how things are going cloud-based, and that's more expensive. On the flip side of that, as we move more, are we looking for more automation, and are we going to see some cost savings on a labor side or on a human resource side by doing more automation or more cloud-based? I mean, I know there's upfront expenses that are more, but do we save on the other end by not having people have to move messages around?
That's a really important issue. Yes, I think I'm going to use the library as an example. Carol Wong is here, who led a beautiful project that looked at automation of library systems. So the up until she put that system in, there was support from our IT department and many others. But until that system was in, they had to track the books coming and going manually. They had to. I don't know if they actually shut the library down to do an inventory, but doing an inventory was a difficult process. In developing that project, we mapped out what did we think the human resource savings would be if we put the system in, and there was human resource savings, and those savings were harvested through attrition and other ways. So the workforce actually became smaller because we were deploying technology in order to replace many of those features. And we are going to continue to do that kind of analysis as we go forward into our new systems. You know, what are the real savings of the system? Identify those before we get into the project, so you're not just replacing systems.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I took a walk with Jeff Maris to the IT department and saw where our storage is shrinking because we don't need physical massive servers as we used to. So, I mean, I would hope that there's savings from a hardware personnel side as we switch to a cloud base. So I'd be interested in knowing, once we've got into this further, where we are in terms of a cost, because I think we do look at the upfront costs, say that geothermal costs more, but over a long run, what are we going to save? And I'd be interested to keep those metrics tracked if possible.
We will be, and if you go back to the presentations that we did for the Southeast Community Center, we were doing full life costing for all of those facilities. So we were looking forward to what is it that we're going to have to pay out in the long term if we do it this way, and we're really pursuing that with some vigor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Chen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Councilor O'Meara's information systems, with the cloud-based issues, does cybersecurity become a greater issue with that as well?
Yes.
Is that where a lot of our money's going to be going towards?
Cybersecurity is an important investment that we make every year. Every year, cybersecurity gets more complex. Every year, the people who want to break into your systems get more sophisticated. So we do spend a portion of our IT budget on cybersecurity. There are many hardware devices deployed. There are many systems deployed. And every year, we do at least 2 ethical hacks.
4 penetrations quarterly. We do a penetration, and then we do a full ethical hack yearly. And so our systems are being managed and monitored all the time.
So an ethical hack.
challenged internally.
Hire external people to do the hacking for us
Okay.
that have the special tools and the special capabilities to do it independently at the town. So we feel that we are
Having said that, I mean, those are due diligence measures that we take, but as I mentioned, hacking becomes more sophisticated every year, and we're finding that this sort of in the domain that does that sort of thing, it's becoming much more personally oriented. So people will target an organization and find out everything they can about it and attack the human aspect as well as the cyber aspect.
So we've not had any major hacking attacks then?
So far that we know of. I personally believe any system can be hacked. It just depends on how dedicated you are, and I'm hoping we don't have any secrets important enough to attract the CIA or the KGB or any of those guys to take a look at us.
I have one more question, Mr. Chair. It's regarding the KPIs on page 132. That's tab 11. It's regarding operations with respect to orders received. There were 7 in 2018, and so I'm wondering, are these random inspections by ESA or TSSA or the ministry?
These are the Ministry of Labor. Yeah, we get periodic inspections, so we are because of the nature of our organization, the Ministry of Labor does tend to focus on what it is that we are doing. And then sometimes if an event takes place, the Ministry of Labor will come out and do an investigation to validate what it is that we did.
So all of these were resolved within the prescribed timeline. Were there any penalties associated with them?
I don't believe we had any penalties. No.
No? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess I was surprised when you got to the FOI where you said tens of thousands of pages.
Oh, yeah.
So is that basically coming from one area of the industry?
Well, the legislation is very careful to cloak where the requests come from. You can usually figure it out if it's a really big one.
Yeah.
But it's commonly used in litigation, so there's a process that all litigation goes through called disclosure, and one way of handling that is to go through the formal process, but another way is to make an FOI request and ask for all of the documents that you've got related to that. We see it used as a corporate weapon sometimes. So, for example, if somebody is building a retail outlet in one part of town and they've got a competitor in another part of town, we'll get FOI requests asking for all of the information about the build of that particular facility, what permits were made and so on. We sometimes see them used as sort of personal weapons. So could we see outstanding orders against a particular property? So there's many different levels, but the big ones are very significant. And as I said, tens of thousands of pages for a significant one is not unusual. And I don't know how many pages the Glen Abbey request would be, but it was definitely many banker boxes of pages, and that's just not unusual anymore.
So do we get full cost recovery of every hour and dollar spent doing this? And if we don't, why don't we?
Well, I can't tell you why we don't. It's a legislated regime. Anybody can file an FOI request for a small fee, and then in the small fee, we can do an evaluation to find out what we think it's going to cost, and we can issue a charge for that cost. I can assure you the charge that we issue for that cost does not cover the actual cost of doing it, but we are legislated to do it.
So we're legislated and we can't charge what we should be charging.
That's true.
So we're all the taxpayers are paying for that.
That's true.
Okay, on the issue of our town website, I'm still having people say that they're having trouble finding things. I wonder, could we, they say if they go to the City of Toronto website, they have a much easier time. I'm wondering whether we could, like staff has analyzed what they're doing different than we are, or if they could go forward.
I think that there are a number of initiatives going on around the website. In the last year, the major initiative was to make the website responsive, and so it could be viewed on cell phones or tablets. And I think there's ongoing work this year involving the redesign of the web. I think though it's a work in progress. So every year they're working away at it. So part of that analysis is looking at other websites throughout North America. It's not just Canada. There are a number of ones that we watch fairly carefully because they do a very good job.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Just I'm hearing that, well, that when they look at Toronto, they can find something easily. I guess that's because they know Toronto, but...
Well, there's certainly an element of familiarity.
Right.
You know, it's easiest to know the one you know to do something on the one you know best.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Green, do you have anything else to add to that, or did it get covered up?
Just one additional comment on that. We are going to be engaging the community in the redesign of our website. So if you do get those kind of comments and people would be interested in participating in the process, that would be terrific. You could forward their names on. We're happy to engage them.
Okay.
I just think on the FOI, actually Mr. Lalonde covered the one part, which is quite often it's litigation between two separate parties. We get dragged into it because of the role that we played and information we have. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Elgar, there is the issue of recovering costs, which is important, but actually one of the things what we're finding is actually the lost time. Because if I have to take the town solicitor to go through dozens and dozens and dozens of looking at what we can release, what we can't release, we actually end up, to us, no value, and we lost time on projects we should be working on. That we can't recover.
Councillor Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a general question about litigation. So last night we kind of alluded to this as well. What types of cost control strategies are we taking from a litigation perspective? So my question is directly around alternative fee arrangements.
Yeah, I put this up. It's fairly new to us. I would say that you know, I've had a concern in the last year that litigation is becoming more a part of the business that we do. I think in the last 3 or 4 months I've confirmed that in my mind that it is. And we have not really thought about how we're going to fund it yet. We're working on that as we speak. And I think we really need to start to address it within our complex contracts. So we probably need to build in, you know, every major project has a contingency. If something goes wrong, I think we're going to have to start thinking about legal contingency. And in order to establish that legal contingency, we're going to have to deal with what do we think are the costs. And you know, one way to approach it is just to presume an hourly rate, but another way is to come at it the way you're suggesting. So we'll be looking at that over the course of the next probably 2 months.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just to follow up to that, so I'd be interested to see in the future the difference between what a potential AFA would be for a litigation and what the straight-through processing would be, so that we can kind of compare from a council perspective to see where our costs would sink or continue.
Excellent. We'll be sure to bring it up.
Any others?
Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Budget Committee. I'm pleasure of presenting the budget for the Community Development Commission. You see on this tab the various programs that contribute to the overall programs for the Community Development Commission, and you'll find those tabs within your book. Each of the directors that represent these programs are here today, so if there's any more detailed questions, they're available to provide those responses. So looking at our 2018 accomplishments, first of all, I added the goal to be the most livable town in Canada as the official plan certainly fits within that category. There was quite a bit of work that was done in 2018 on the Livable Oakville review. Predominantly, there were the road plan areas that we looked at, the Bronte, the Kerr, and the downtown. In each of those areas, we renewed the policies that were in place previously and brought forward new policies that allow those areas to continue to regenerate and revitalize themselves as they move forward into the future. In addition, the residential policy update was begun. The character study you had seen as part of that, and one of the first implementing tools was the minor variance criteria that was worked on last year and will continue to be worked on in 2019. Our Cultural Heritage Landscape Implementation Strategy has continued into 2018 and will continue into 2019. We had originally identified 8 priority sites, which you're quite familiar with. We worked through most of those. And so now we're beginning to look at other sites. There was some sites on Burnthorpe that we had actually designated as Cultural Heritage Landscapes. That's the Joshua Creek Arts Center. We have identified the Bronte Harbor as another area, as well as the Oakville Harbor. So studies are going on in those areas to really understand what are the cultural heritage landscape elements of those that we need to recognize and move into a conservation plan approach similar to what we've done in other areas. It seems a long time ago, but we did finish the Transportation Master Plan. It was really an update of the master plan itself, and that was in support of the DC bylaw that was coming forward early in 2018. In terms of environmental leadership, we finalized the Biodiversity Strategy in the fall of 2018. What that strategy does is pulls together all the plans and policies and programs that we have in place for environmental leadership, really looking at our natural heritage areas, our urban forest, and our open space areas. The plan sets out a framework for 4 areas within the town where we can improve our biodiversity, all the way from the areas that we protect in our official plan as designations and policies and provincial policies that enables us to do that, moving all the way down to someone's backyard and what they could do on their own in order to promote biodiversity. So there are a number of strategies identified in that document that look at how we monitor, how we educate, and how we bring some stewardship into the biodiversity piece. So you'll see a lot of those pieces being implemented through 2019. There was, of course, the update to the Environmental Sustainability Plan, which you saw late in the fall of 2018, and the completion of the Crosstown Trail. That was the section from Niagara to 8th Line that was completed. There are still some drainage deficiencies we're looking at through into 2019, and we've done the design work from 8th Line over to the North Ridge Trail in 2018. On economic leadership, as part of the Livable Oakville Official Plan Review, we completed the Economic and Commercial Policy Amendment, which took the policies that we have already in place, renewed those. There was quite an extensive study that was done that looked at the amount of employment land that we needed, both on the commercial as well as the employment side of it, to understand, so that background document informed where we go on the policies. Supporting and in line with that, we needed to look at the Spears Road corridor. That's an area that's quite unique in terms of the way it has developed, and to provide more flexibility in the way that corridor moves forward. And of course, Downtown Lakeshore Streetscape Plan in all its detail was finalized in 2018, and we started the first wave of implementation in downtown with the conversion of the 2-way street system from the 1-way to the 2-way street system that's now in place. This will set the framework for us to be able to begin the construction on Lakeshore Road in 2019. In terms of the fiscal sustainability, Council had approved the Kerr Street, previously the Burloak principles of an agreement with Metrolinx. In December, revisions to that agreement were worked through. And Council approved that and actually pre-approved it as part of the budget process. That is an important agreement that we have with Metrolinx, a partnership with them to build those 2 major grade separations. And probably the most important fiscal side of this is the town was able, through those negotiations and discussions with Metrolinx, to really cap our costs and our risk in terms of implementing the Kerr Street project in particular. And of course, the background work on transportation was also done to support the DC bylaw. There was a number of studies that were done on the outstanding services to residents. You see them listed there. I actually won't go through them all. I'll highlight the taxi bylaw, which you considered late in 2018, but that really reconciles how we're dealing with transportation network companies and the taxi business, so that now they're treated more consistently between the two. There was a group of construction projects that were undertaken, both on the roadway system as well as with shoreline protection that are listed in there. In good governance, we provided comments on Bill 139. Actually, we've continued with that in terms of requesting the intervenor status on the rail deck so that we can represent the town's interests in terms of ensuring that Bill 139 is interpreted in the way that we think is the most supportive for the town's ability to implement its policies through the legislative process they set out. Cannabis implementation, you'll see that coming forward next Monday. So there is a report that will be out in your agenda packages this week. There was one in December which provided the background. In reality, there's not a lot. If the legislation goes and the regulations are put in place the way they are today, depending on where you go on the stores, there are really limited impacts in terms of the town costs on cannabis, and I think that was well set out in the December 17th report that you considered. The sign bylaw was updated. I think you did that late in the year of 2018 as well. It is quite a comprehensive review. You could almost look at that as a continuous improvement project. It does streamline the way we look at our sign bylaws, provides more simplicity to that process. So that has been updated. The bylaw, I think, is much more readable than it was previously. And Gord had touched on the leadership plan and the various initiatives we have within that. He had spoke specifically to the dynamic workforce and the continuous improvement. I'm going to speak to just the continuous improvement projects. There are really 3 projects that we've been working on through 2018. There's the property Centric review, which is a review of all the application processes that we have that deal with land development. Streamlining those processes, making them more customer friendly to the customer who needs to work through those permit processes. Certainly dealing with the response times with those, moving towards more of an online system. So there were a number of, this was a phase 1 of that project to really identify what is that roadmap that we need to put in place so that we have both quick wins in terms of improving services almost immediately, and then the longer term projects that really need to look at shifting all of our permit or land development processes more to an online system so that people can interact with that 24/7, and a quicker turnaround time could be enabled through that. The building services, there was a specific work done on that, and there's been a number of quick wins that we've actually put in place in terms of the building services review. It's been an extensive review that started in 2017. We did hire an outside consultant to help us through that review. We finished the phase 1 of it, but just in doing the lean review, there's lots of opportunities we've put in place already to shorten and streamline the way in which we move through permits. So for example, at the front counter now we have zoning officers that are there that can screen an application and decide whether or not it even needs a zoning review immediately so that it can bypass that entire process and move right on to review. Through the actual permit process itself. So that takes quite a few days off the review of an application. We've also been working to put in place some fast track projects, so types of projects such as the ICI, industrial, commercial, institutional tenant fit out. Those projects are almost taken offline and fast tracked because as a tenant moving into a building, you have a lease that ends and you need to be up and running the next day. And so it's important that we meet those time frames. So that's a piece of work that we've put in place. Also for the residential community, decks or those types of quick permits, we've shortened the time frame for those to move them forward. The longer term projects we're looking on the building services review. We'll really look at how we can put into the field building inspectors with tablets so that the information is entered immediately. This is where the system upgrades will really help us in terms of reducing the time frame, and I think probably more of a cost avoidance in terms of staff time in the future as more applications come in. And the Municipal Enforcement Strategy, you had approved that, I think it was back in 2017, it might have been even 16. And that was a program to really look at how we can coordinate all of our enforcement activities into one area. There's an expertise to enforcing all of our bylaws. And so it allows the Municipal Enforcement Group to have all of those bylaws in one place to enforce them. That means the efforts that were in the previous departments would be consolidated into municipal enforcement. And so we've undertaken that in 2018, and for example, the development engineering, inspections or enforcement component of their jobs is now undertaken through municipal enforcement, and we'll be moving through that in all of the other types of departments that do that. So the KPIs, moving on to those, you can see on the screen the various KPIs that you have in your books. The trends look fairly positive. Gord had spoken quite extensively about the WCCD data that comes in. I would note on the bicycle paths, I think we're 9 out of 54, I think it was, in terms of us ranking ourselves against the other participants on the WCC data. So we're quite high in terms of the amount of bicycle paths and lanes that we provide per 100,000 compared to 54 other communities throughout the world. In terms of our service delivery, the first group is the building services. There are time frames that are dedicated to different types of permits that you see, the 10-day stretching all the way down to the 30-day. Generally, the amount of applications that have been coming in have been declining, as well as we've been putting in some time-saving measures, which you see and generally throughout all of those days. The one I'd flag for you is the 20-day, and the 20-day is actually still increasing, and that is the ones that deal with the ICI fit-outs predominantly, or the tenant fit-outs, and that is an area we focused in, and we've begun to implement that fast-track program. So I would expect you would see that decline in the following 2019 information. In terms of the next one, I've highlighted in red, excuse me, the percentage of development applications that are processed within the time frame. I think within the budget book it refers to a 6% for 2017 and around a 30% for 2018. We re-looked at those numbers fairly recently because we know that with the LPAC being in place as of April, there are specific time frames where we need to report in an application, and if we don't report within that time frame, council's decision on those matters is not considered within the further processes. So we have been processing applications through 2018. Anything that came in within the LPAC timeframes or the LPAC legislation, we have been processing them to get you a report so you can make a decision before the time frame runs out. So we were quite surprised when we saw the 30%. So we re-looked at the numbers. It's actually 90% of the applications that have come in 2018 that we have actually dealt with within the mandated time frames. And we re-looked at the 6% that was in 2017, and clarification on that number is it's actually 33%. And that is reflective, I think, generally, the amount of time to process a development application that's been legislated for quite some time is not sufficient to actually deal with the details of the application. So as a result of that, moving into the LPAC process where we absolutely need to report, we are looking at mechanisms to ensure the complete application is even more complete than we would have had before, and you'll see reports coming forward on that in 2019 to actually change our policies requiring more completeness, which gives us a fair ability to actually evaluate the application within the time frame. The time frames for we're getting much better in terms of our bylaw enforcement as well as our road cuts. So in 2019, we have a number of initiatives. We have a Livable Oakville plan that's continuing on. Particularly this year, we're looking at the major growth areas, so the Midtown, the Uptown, the Palermo, as well as the Brownie GO station and the health-oriented mixed-use nodes around the hospital. Understanding what are those policies and bringing forward amendments on those in 2019. The region is also undertaking their official plan review. So we will play a major role in commenting to them and informing them of the way the town would like to move forward, which a lot of the work that you have approved informs them of that already. And we'll be working with them to ensure that those interests of the town are reflected in the official plan review of the region. You had approved a community energy plan funding, and we now have a task force that you had actually dedicated a member to, and the task force will begin its first meeting in January, I believe it is. The purpose of the community energy plan is much broader than just the town's energy uses. It looks broadly at what are the uses within the community, and as an overall community, the employment, the industrial, the residents, what can we all collectively do to reduce the energy impact within the town as a whole. So that plan should come forward to you in 2019. The implementation of the cultural heritage landscape will be continuing. The Stormwater Master Plan and Financial Strategy is there. It has been as an initiative for quite some time. I know that we found some challenges on the Stormwater Master Plan in really understanding what is the climate change impacts. When we'd originally started that study, the impacts were much less than I think the science has shown over the last while. So we've done a fair amount of work in increasing the impacts of climate change to really reflect it in the model. So the sensitivity analysis has taken us some time to complete. We are going to be looking at the financial strategies in order to implement that into 2019 and likely into 2020, I would assume as well. But you will see the master plan and understand what are the financial implications of stormwater going into the future. Parking strategy, I think we've dealt with this in almost every one of the Planning and Development Council meetings. We are looking at the parking, and as I think I'd said at the Planning and Development Council in 3 ways. Short term is really looking at what are the standards for the parking that we have right now, the ratios, and bringing you forward information on that. In the medium term is looking at what are the ways in which we can increase parking within our communities. 2 examples I'd give you is in North Oakville, what are the opportunities for permit parking and what enhancements can we make to that program that provides more parking in the community. And the other is the direction for the Bronte area and pilot project in order to move to paid parking within that community. The longer term is really looking at, and this would be part of the official plan review, a discussion paper on how can we influence over the very long term transportation so there's less reliance on the automobile and less impact within our communities. I think as the Transportation Master Plan had demonstrated, we have a limited capacity to expand roads, so we can't continue to count on the car to move ourselves around. But the reality is we still have a car today. So how do we balance those things and transition ourselves into the future? That will be part of one of the discussion papers on the OP review. As Gord said, we're in uncertain times in terms of where the province is going. I've only listed 3 changes that we're dealing with. These are 3 reports that will be on your Planning and Development Council meeting in January, next Monday. But we expect many more changes from the province in terms of their legislation and what our responsibilities will be. So it will take up a fair amount of time within 2019 and likely into 2020 as well. On the litigation side, certainly we're partners with our legal department, the planning department in particular, as well as development engineering and engineering construction, provide a lot of the expert evidence to support the cases that we have moving forward under litigation. So it is also quite a time commitment to the departments within the Commission. Moving into some of the construction that we have, I've listed several projects here. There are many more that are in the capital book itself. The Lakeshore Road West, EA, Council has certainly given us some direction on how to proceed with that, so we'll be working on that through 2019 and bringing that plan back to you likely in the spring after much more consultation. The Spears Road reconstruction will begin, as well as the other projects I've listed there. On the continuous improvement side, I think I've already spoken to the property Centric. We'll be moving into specific programs within that. 2, again, on the assumption that we need to have some quick wins as well as some long-term pieces. On the quick win side, we're looking at our securities and how we take securities through the development process. Right now, we take it on individual permit applications is their way to coordinate those, to use different mechanisms besides securities or letters of credit in order to secure the works that we want on the public infrastructure. So that's more of a quicker win type of project. The second is focusing on ICI projects from the time of a site plan submission all the way to the issuance of the building permit, and how can we streamline that process, make it more customer friendly for the customers that are coming in. ICI is a particularly different type of development. Whenever they get a tenant, then they're in a rush to get in, and we need to be able to respond to that. So we're looking specifically at that client group for that project. We will also be looking at the corridor review. We've added that into the program. And the road corridor is really looking at how we coordinate our permits through that process, how we coordinate with the region and the others, the utilities, and those that are doing work within our corridors. The last is the Municipal Enforcement, which I think I spoke to in 2018 accomplishments. I can't leave accomplishments for initiatives for 2019 without talking about the downtown. The slide here shows the various elements that we have that we will be implementing through the downtown. It's really a downtown revitalization. It's much larger than just the Lakeshore Road construction. So in terms of the streetscape enhancements, those are the granite pavers, the detailed street furniture that you've looked at, the street lighting. All of those elements are in place. It's about a $5.2 million cost to the downtown, and that has actually been funded through debt financing. So that component of it is funded in that way. The road construction, and that's really the civil work that has to be done, will be starting in April of 2019. Again, we'll be finishing in November of 2019, the first phase, and then starting again in March or April of the following year to finish the overall construction by about November of 2020. That's a cost of $13 million. It does not include within these costs the about $3 million of regional infrastructure that also needs to be constructed within Lakeshore Road. The mitigation you had dealt with as part of reports earlier in September. That amount includes the addition to the Saturday parking that you had requested as part of that council direction. The town square, we have a placeholder of the $1.8 million. Very much the conceptual design is still under review. We would like to, and I think it's important to incorporate the reconstruction of town square at the same time as we're doing the rest of the roads, but we do need to finish the consultation that's underway on town square before we do that. But we have looked at different ways of ensuring that that construction can happen seamlessly, so that we're not coming back in on town square at some later date. The Smart City initiatives have been incorporated in your budget material. Listed there are the 4 main elements that we'll achieve out of it. Out of the $884,000 that are identified for this group of projects, $675,000 is actually funded out of the parking reserve, because much of it does relate to our ability to provide for either an app or some type of way for people to identify what parking is available within the lots and in the future along Lakeshore, so that they can more easily find parking in the area. So digital display boards helps with the wayfinding, information about the downtown, and the pedestrian vehicle count is certainly something that the BIA has been looking for, so that we understand the level of activity within the downtown and the implications of the economy on that type of activity. So I didn't want to leave the presentation. It's a very difficult slide to see, but I think the main point in this is that we are constantly monitoring our revenue. And you'll see in the following slides that a significant portion of the revenue for the commission comes out of the land development component. So we have moved from an attempt to try and understand what is the amount of revenue coming on an annual basis to taking an average amount of revenue over a 7 or a 5-year period, and using that as our mechanisms to actually budget for that group. So that means that in any particular year, if there's a surplus from that average, that surplus would go into a reserve fund, tax stabilization for both development, engineering, and planning. For building, it actually goes into a building reserve fund. If there's a shortfall, then we draw from those components. So we're going to be monitoring this on an annual basis, always budgeting at the average. It seems to be the best way to be able to really understand and mitigate the cost to the tax levy on as a result of these revenues. But at some point in time, the municipality is going to shift into needing to look more forward as we continue into more infill rather than looking past into the way we're currently developing. So monitoring of this work is going to be important as we move into the future. Oops, sorry. So this is where you do see the revenue as a large component of the revenue into the commission as a whole. So overall, we're about at 10.5% of the gross operating costs, but once you take away the revenue component, we drop to about 4.2%. So this is the split of the gross budget, the operating budget among the different types of costs within the commission. Would note that internal expenses are predominantly the staff costs that come from processing development applications. So a big component of the cost within the commission is staff, either from within the commission or outside. So in terms of the gross operating budget, you'll see the splits here, and then it certainly changes when you get into the net operating budget, because you'll see the revenue producing departments reducing in terms of their percentage. This compares the tax levy drop by each one of those programs. It stayed fairly consistent year to year. It is mostly a result of staff increases. The planning services, I would note, because that is a result, the 5-year or the 7-year average is a rolling average. So each year we average back the previous 7 years. So that amount changes, which means that the change in planning is predominantly to do with revenue. There were a number of, a few council requests, referrals, or reports, referrals, and requests coming out of the December meeting. So you have in your agenda, I think on page 5, the Municipal Access Agreement Report. In essence, it responds predominantly to the COGICO requests that had come in. They had some concerns about the cost of the fees and whether or not they actually represented what the legislation allows us to charge for. You'll see in the report that the costs do represent casual costs, and those are the only costs that we can charge for. We have, as a result of the rates and fees, and you'll see within your budget material, we've introduced a minor and a major fee, which really is something that COGICO is asking for. So that is in place within the fee bylaw. We need to have a municipal access agreement with all of our partners. Bell and COGICO are two, we do not. So that municipal access agreement is underway. There's been quite a few changes from what council had originally adopted in 2012, and we'll be meeting with COGICO and Bell to move forward on those access agreements fairly shortly. There was a request, I think it was from Councillor Chisholm, on the noise meter equipment that's put in the budget. There's about 16,000 to buy 2 different types, or 2 machines of the same kind. Predominantly they regulate stationary noise. They can assist in motorcycles, as I understand from Mr. Barry, but enforcement of even the motorcycles is a challenge because you need to have the police. Bylaw enforcement officers can't pull anyone over. And I understand that for motor vehicles it really provides no benefit at all, given the definitions that are in the Highway Traffic Act. It really doesn't allow us to use this type of equipment to be able to do it, and you always have the police issue. There was a request about traffic calming and what are we doing with traffic calming. So this lists out the various programs that we have that contribute to traffic calming. Directly, we have an annual budget of $164,000 to implement traffic calming on our streets themselves, and that there's a group of several different tactics to implement. That number of 164 is no different than it has been on any other year, so we continue to implement going forward. We also have within the capital budget about $1.45 million, or about $1.5 million, to put in some pedestrian crossovers and other types of things, which is not directly traffic calming, but it certainly is something that provides additional safety to the pedestrian. There's the radar speed display sign, the radar signs, which will continue. They'll be moved around to better reflect some of the input from the community in 2019. And there is the flashing 40 beacons that were actually approved as part of the 2018 budget, which will now be deployed into 2019. You do have 4 outstanding requests on your outstanding reports, which we will be bringing forward in 2019. They're related to the, as you can see here, the photo radar, reduced speed limits, the 40-kilometer discussion that's been happening, and other traffic calming thresholds. And I think as a result of looking at those various components, if there are some additional traffic calming initiatives that we should be looking at, we'll certainly be dealing with that in those reports that we can either consider in 2019 or in 2020. The road resurfacing program. There was a request for us to show the quality of pavement index that we have shown in each year. So I also have a comparison. You'll see in the black line is the 2018 program. So this is the quality of our roads on an aggregate basis annually. And certainly the contribution that Council has been making to our resurfacing program has been consistently reducing the deficiencies within our road systems. You can see that in 2018, that was the scale of deficiencies that were identified with the black line. We have, as part of this budget, taken out $500,000 for the first 5 years of the program in order to offset some of the costs, which is in essence a component of road resurfacing for Lakeshore Road. So a portion of that has been taken out for that project. So you'll see there's been a slight increase in the deficiencies. It's probably put the program back maybe a year maximum moving forward. The tail end of this is really as a result of some of the North Oakville roads coming into the need of being resurfaced from where they have been put in place in 2008, were some of the first roads that had gone in. It also is some of the resurfacing roads that we've already done in this program. There'll be a need to redo them again. So you'll see that blip as those new roads come in. But I think the discussion at the Budget Committee in December was whether or not we could look at different types of standards for our local roads. And the answer is certainly yes. We have been doing a fair amount of work on looking at, so what is the impact on local roads? Minor and minor arterials and collectors are probably at a good standard that we've put in place. We are looking specifically at local roads to see whether or not the quality index, if there's really that much of a difference between the various categorizations, that we could perhaps move those down to a, I wouldn't say a lower quality, I would say an appropriate quality. So that report we're hoping to bring forward. There's a fair amount of roads that we do as adjacent roads to those programs that may not be needing to be done. So that's an area that we're also focusing on. I expect to bring a report forward on that probably at the same time as the stormwater management master plan comes forward, because there's a need to reconcile all of our infrastructure needs with a lot of the information that we have on our asset management plan as well, to balance those costs overall. So we will be looking at strategies. We don't have them at this point in time, but we will in 2019. So a capital budget overview. You have the list of projects that we're taking forward, with certainly the Lakeshore Road being the first on the list and the road resurfacing closely behind. I won't go into the rest of them. I think you're familiar with them, that they're in the book. In terms of the the capital program for the commission. You see most of it is in infrastructure planning, with some of the studies in planning and development out of the total capital program for the town. And lastly, the various categories of projects, with infrastructure removed being the largest component, and growth and strategic priorities following about equal. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. I'm going to start with Councillor Elgar.
Jane, thanks for the presentation. A few questions. One of them is the tow truck bylaw. Do you know when it's going to come back to council, or if it is coming back?
It will be coming back. You had requested us to bring something back again. I think the spring was the time frame I'm looking to June. Yes, the spring was the time frame we were hoping to bring that back.
Okay, thank you. Parking. It's a huge issue. When will we be seeing some revised numbers for parking?
Well, we're hoping that in the spring we'll be bringing forward the short-term measures. The medium-term measures, there is a parking review that's underway for North Oakville, and that's part of the budget request here, to look at that, to review the permit process that we have in place, what are our opportunities. So that one will probably be later in the year, and that was that mid-term report that I spoke of. Of course, the Brawny piece, we have a commitment to bring forward a report back in February on the Bronte pilot project. So in terms of the standards that we apply to parking, we'll be looking at that now and bringing forward something in spring.
Okay. Bill 66, I noticed you mentioned it, but that could have a major impact on the operations at the town, I would think. Yeah. A lot of the things they're talking about come into play.
It could, if the town decides to use the provisions that are in the bill. Really, it gives you an opportunity, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. If you wanted to pass an open for business bylaw, and I'm thinking specifically of the planning piece of it, because that legislation is quite broad. It's only if you want to take the opportunity does it have an implication.
So we don't have to take the opportunity?
No, it's a request that we could make to the minister in order to have the bylaw in place, and we could choose not to do that. There are a fair number of implications to the region within the bylaw. With the daycare, there's a number of changes within that that have implications in others. But for us directly, the planning piece is an opportunity, and I do say that with quotes.
Okay. Okay. The other thing, like, we've got a pretty qualified staff, and I always find it interesting. We seem to use a lot of outside consultants. It's like, you know, they like borrow your watch to tell you the time. And in many cases where we have the staff, do we have movement afoot to cut back on the outside consultants and use our staff for their expertise? Like, are we looking at that?
Actually, we, I think, have cut back on the use of consultants quite substantially in a lot of the planning work that we've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. Because it's much more effective to have your own staff do that work so that they're familiar with it, and it fits much better with community expectations and council expectations. But some of the studies that are here that need to be done, you need specific expertise, and so only for those areas that we don't have the expertise have we hired outside consultants to undertake the work. So I think generally we've been moving in that direction for quite some time.
So do we have numbers to prove that we're reducing our consultants' costs year over year?
No, I don't, but we can, I'm sure, put that together for you.
That would be helpful too. I appreciate that. Cogeco Bell, some of the, on our public areas where they're in and they're rutting up everything, people are doing a lot of complaining. And they're not that good at cleaning up after themselves. Do we fully charge them for what we have to do to go back and replace everything and fix it up?
Well, in any work that would be done, there'd be permit requirements. But quite often they come in and do repairs that don't have permits associated with them. I think that's the benefit of the municipal access agreement, is to really have within that access agreement requirements for time periods to do the maintenance and repair. So that's an important discussion to have with them. Hamilton has recently signed an agreement with Bell and Cogeco for their municipal access requirements, which sets out anything from new construction all the way through to the maintenance of the construction they have. So we're using that as a bit of a template because we know they've signed those agreements in order to clean up the maintenance side at the other end.
Because I tend to think it's costing us a lot of money, the town, the taxpayer, for damage done by those contractors, for sure. And a lot of people are complaining about it, and it's not that easy to get around every rut on the boulevard, I agree.
I'm not so sure that it's actually costing us a lot of money.
It's just timelines to get
But it is certainly an encumbrance in the community.
Yeah, and it's something that shows up every
Yeah.
time some people goes for a walk. The only other thing I have, you mentioned pavement resurfacing, and that's become a big issue, and maybe not your roads, but Glen Abbey parking lot. I don't know whether any of you ever gone to have a look at the new paving job they did, but it's real bushly. I've never seen paving that was completed so poorly. And I'm wondering, I'd love to know, did something happen? Did the spec get done wrong? Or are something's wrong there?
Not sure we can look into that.
I really
You're talking about
appreciate
the
it.
community center.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. If you could, especially Ray, because Ray knows pavement, I'd really appreciate it if you take a look at that. It's bad. Yeah, so I'm hoping they haven't been paid yet, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I thank you.
Okay, Councilor Chinna, you had some questions?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. I just wanted clarification on page 16, key program outcomes with respect to the percentage of development applications meeting statutory timeframes. Could you clarify, is it because more FTE time was dedicated to improve to the 90%? Or I didn't understand the comment that you made about that future applications will have more details in it, so that way it doesn't have to be more of a back and forth process with respect to that timeline?
So you're talking about the timelines for site plan subdivision applications?
The key program, yes. The service delivery percentage of development applications. Yes, the subdivisions official for the zoning.
Yeah.
So you said that increase the timeline in order to achieve the timeline, so council doesn't get into trouble or decisions. You had said that more detailed applications will be now asked of applicants?
So we have an ability to require a complete application to come in, and the time periods for review don't start until you have a complete application. So we're looking at redefining what does a complete application mean. So that means that the time that we would have spent, perhaps getting some further details after we declared it complete, we don't have to do. We can make sure that stuff comes in ahead of time, so it's a better application to have a better potential of doing it within the time frame.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I have a number of questions from the budget book, if okay with that. So on page, let me just start here, 249. You answer that question for me. So 265. Let's go to 262. So the KPI for the percentage of tickets resolved during facilitation sessions, we have 99% in 2018, which is great. I'm just wondering, what is the feedback from the residents? We get the feedback of, I got this ticket, I'm really upset. We direct them to town hall to book a facilitation session. Do we have any feedback from residents of how, I realize we get a resolution, but is that money well spent from the standpoint of satisfaction from residents?
I believe it is, but I might suggest that Jim Barry might be able to have direct for that feedback. Jim?
Oh, Jim, where are you?
Our overall impression has been it's a positive experience because they can resolve the tickets that much quicker.
Through you, and I do apologize. I couldn't hear part of the question from the back of the room. If you could please repeat it.
We have a very good record of resolving tickets through the facilitation process, and I never heard here afterwards how that went. So are you getting good feedback from residents about that?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, we've heard good things, and for a number of reasons. The most significant, previously, if you had an issue with a parking ticket, you had to go to Burlington to fight it. So everybody from Oakville had to go make the trek to Burlington, go before a justice. You're on the court timeline, so it would extend out, and then you'd finally get your resolution, and a lot of times weren't that happy. What we've been able to do by bringing it to the screening position here at the town is keep everybody local and resolve the issues within a much more condensed timeline, so it resolves the issues much more quickly. So I think it's the fact that it's ease of access has resulted in an improved...
And the access to the facilitator is good as well, so it's not weeks or...
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we're, and I could be wrong on this, but it's around 6 weeks we're waiting as opposed to 6 months or 8 months. So we've improved those timelines quite significantly, and again, everybody has relative ease of access.
Okay, so my next question, I guess, back to Peter, is regarding the parking. So the Honk app, how well is that, the uptake of that app? Do you know how well it's been to date?
It has been increasing consistently in terms of the uptake on that. We'll be relying on that quite a bit for mitigation for the downtown. And in fact, one of the mitigation components was to give the first hour, I think it is, free if you're using the Honk app, which we should see the uptake for the Honk app then significantly increase.
So the cost of that app, is that based on the number of users of it, or is that a free app?
No, there was cost to put the app in place at the beginning, and again, I'm looking at Jim, but an ongoing cost to maintain the Honk app there's a surcharge?
It's a service.
Yeah, like a service charge. Yes.
All right, thank you. Page 282, the KPI for square feet of industrial development. We've gone from 263,000 in 2017 to 57,000. And I'm just curious whether this is obviously a significant decrease. Is this because people are just not interested in building, or is there not the space is now limited?
I think there's several factors that contribute to that. One is we have seen the decline of industrial space within Oakville for a number of years now. A shift from industrial to more of an office type of employment focus. So that is one component of it. I think also we don't have a lot of serviced employment lands for the industrial base, so that is a component as well. But I think the biggest thing is the focus in Oakville in the future will be on the office component, and that's certainly representative of our economic development strategy.
So this is not a concerning number?
No, and it's been a challenge that we've had to deal with through the development charges bylaw too, of really understanding what is the future on the industrial side as opposed to the commercial or office side.
Great. So the next page, square feet of commercial development. We've got for 2018, that's 355,288. Is this actually built or like shovels in the ground or approved?
So the data comes from the building permit process, so that would be permits that have been issued, and so that's been built.
So that has been built for 2018?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Page 303. The KPI for planning services. So number 5 there, percentage of site plan applications processed from initiation to recommendation within 4 months. So the 4-month timeline, is that a town standard or is that a legislative?
It's a town standard.
Oh, it's a town standard. And so
the legislative standard is actually 30 days, I believe. It still is. But there's little opportunity to complete the site plan within that opportunity, within that time frame. So we've placed a service standard of 4 months.
I see, okay. I'm assuming that 5% in 2017 was a typo.
It is actually, and we had time to go back and look at, as I said in the presentation, the development applications. We do need to look at the site plan piece, because the way that data was collected for 17 and 18 is not reflective of the previous years.
Okay.
So we'll go back and do that work.
Great. Page 312, under development engineering. Okay. So percentage of permit applications processed within the prescribed time frame. So 4 to 6 weeks. I guess my question here is, so it's the start of it and the completion of it, but if there's questions to go back to the applicant, that doesn't count as part of that timeline. Is that correct? So if someone has a permit and it's perfectly done, it gets approved within 4 to 6 weeks. But if there's issues with it, it goes back and forth, then it's out of this KPI.
And well, this processing time, however, includes the time when the application resides with the applicant. So I'd say it's included within that time frame.
Okay.
So where it goes back to the applicant and we don't meet the time frame, those numbers are included in here.
I know that Councillor Adams and I have received questions from residents about where are we in the permit process. And so when I would check with staff, I would get the application's been sent back to the applicant, but it's usually the third party dealing for them. So does the applicant or the resident also get notification, or is it just whoever's working on behalf of the resident? Because they seem to feel like they're out of the loop.
Yeah, for those types of applications, there's 2 ways that the residents could actually inquire about, but they would have to inquire about it. Those are applications that have no real public process with them. It is the applicant that's required to meet the requirements of the permit. So there are 2 ways that the residents could come on. We now have on the website a map that shows all the permit application and has a status on there. So that's one way of checking it, the quickest way of actually checking it. We are looking at improvements on that website so that you'll have more information about the permit application. And I would say eventually in the longer term on an online system, you actually should be able to go in and see the details of that permit from anybody, which is the longer term project that we'd be looking at. So that's one way, and the other way is certainly through an inquiry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're probably getting harped on this a little bit, but just about the parking again, because I would like to be very clear. I understand we're looking at short-term, medium-term, long-term. Things are going to come by April, but from what the concerns that I hear from myself and my council colleagues during planning and development meetings is why are there only so many parking spots? And then the response I get is because that's what our bylaw is telling them they can do. So when are we going to change or have the opportunity to change what our bylaw is telling developers they need to do when they build developments wherever it is, and not just in North Oakville, but be it seniors residents down in Brawny that are going to get built now that we have, be it new buildings. When are we going to have the opportunity to change that specific bylaw in our OP or zoning bylaw or where it is in order to ensure that the fervor we get when there are only 8 parking spots for a commercial development and we say, well, that's what's in our plan. When is that opportunity to happen?
That's the short-term initiative, so that we're looking at the spring.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the last thing was just in terms of the permitting process, and I know we're doing the review. Have we ever considered 2 different streams, one for business permitting and development and one just for residential permitting and development? Or does it all just get thrown in the hopper and whoever comes up first goes?
We did, I wouldn't say we spent a lot of time on that scenario through the building services review, only because it's a similar staff group that's looking at the application. So I'm not sure how if you had 2 streams of staff and different expertise, that would make sense to split them out that way. But that isn't the case. And so we're looking at alternatively taking out those quick applications that shouldn't take a lot of review out of the process, which then allows some more dedicated time to look at either the ICI or the residential projects and process those permits more quickly.
Yeah, I guess my concern, and we've got a lot of new development going on in Michigan Avenue by the Burl Oak, and they're building great, job creations and employment lands, but they just get queued in behind, Mr. and Mrs. Jones who want to put a renovation on, and they're waiting to employ many people, and so and we treat these all the same at this point. Is that?
So I think for those types of new builds, it's not just the building permit process, it's the site plan process as well, because if it's a new build, it's subject to site plan. And so that's why we're looking at the full process from the minute somebody submits a site plan to the time they get a building permit. There's opportunities to blend the site plan process more into the building permit process. So details such as how you treat your sidewalks or your landscaping and those types of things on site plan can be dealt with at the same time as the building permit itself is processing. So that's how we're looking at the ICI projects in terms of dealing with in the whole time frame. Because for an applicant, it really doesn't matter which process they're in, it's how long does it take them to get to the opportunity to build. And so we're looking at that whole process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor, just
thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to the noise issue, and I know that's a real concern in our ward with respect to motorcycles and motorcycles that don't have mufflers and cars that don't have mufflers, high-performance vehicles. And I understand the technology is not there on a moving vehicle, and it's very difficult to get the readings appropriately. My question is this: there seems to be a lot of gaps between the police and our municipal enforcement on the operational side of it. Has there ever been any discussions with respect to those municipal enforcement where those responsibilities would be looked at in a way through a scope of saying, you know what, it's better the municipality would take that on rather than the police doing it, knowing what their roles and functions are? I know the Police Act and it's a provincial thing. Is there any, I know I'm at the 10,000 foot level, but is there any discussion with respect to looking at efficiencies between municipal enforcement and police enforcement?
As I understand it, and Jim would correct me, it is the legislation that precludes the ability to do what you're suggesting to do. There is, I know the City of Toronto has been working quite extensively to look at broadening out the Police Act so that it gives more opportunities for bylaw enforcement and those types of activities. Regulating special events, for an example, is one where only the police can do that in terms of the road corridor itself. So there is some exploration into that area, but in essence it needs a legislative change in order to be able to do that.
And how would we proceed on that? Through the chair? That's right, PP. I just got the advice from the mayor. Thank you, Mayor.
Is that it? Okay, Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on Councillor Elger's question regarding the municipal access agreement, we have Cogeco and Bell making very creative uses of our municipal trees and utility poles, stringing hundreds of feet of wire and various things. Do we have any say on any ability to rectify that, or is that their way of pushing back against our proposed agreement with them on fees? Just curious.
So in terms of enforcement on those, I do believe we do under the road corridor, but I'd like to take a moment to clarify that so I can report back to you on that element.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it is.
I would think on the road corridor we have some control, certainly, on what happens within the road corridor.
Because the utility pole and the tree are on the corridor and the wires are on the...
Yeah, but I think the longer term solution is to have actually the municipal access agreement in place. There's quite a bit of discussion that we've had with Cogeco and Bell about the way in which they install that equipment, and so what you're seeing is they're not agreeing with our standard of the way we want it installed, because we want it installed at a deeper level than they're prepared to do, given the cost of that. And then the whole discussion about the permit fee process. So you're seeing them simply not applying, and so that's why they're just going in, and the aerial attachments to the houses are staying there for a longer period of time than they should be. They should be just a temporary thing until the ground's good enough to install it. So yes, we would have the ability within the road corridor for enforcement side of it, but the better way to look at it in the longer term is to get that access agreement in place.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Councillor Palmer?
Could I just add a couple of comments about the utility companies? And in part, I should hit that button. In part, you are seeing sort of that pressure because it's a protest against our fees. But, you know, knowing quite a few people in the utility business, including some family members, they're under a great deal of pressure as well to reduce costs, just like everybody else. And so what they can get away with in the field, just like private contractors, there's not that slack in their fees. You know, over time, we've watched, even whether it's private companies, you know, you would build certain slack into your fees so that from a customer service point of view, you know, you could be a good corporate citizen. That stuff's gone away now. It's everybody is down to the sharpest pen they can and anything they can do, and that causes challenges in a municipality in particular. You know, with the stringing through trees. Well, we could say, no, you can't put that in a town tree, or you can't put that on a hydro pole, but the meat and the sandwich becomes a customer who will lose access to his, you know, 80 gig internet connection, his Netflix and or her Amazon Prime. And so it becomes this battle. We are trying with the utility companies to find that happy medium so that they can give good customer service. Part of the problem is too, they don't employ the staff, because I have a son who works in the cable business in Rogers, in a different municipality. And at one time when your cable broke, they'd come out, they'd give you the quick temporary fix, but you know what? They'd be back in 2 weeks with the Rogers service repair people to redo your connection. Now, like everybody else, you know what? I add all these things up and I'll let it go for 8 months, and then I'll hire one very cheap contractor to come in and do them all. So it's a difficult thing, and unfortunately the person who's really caught with this is the end user. I'm hoping we can get a better relationship, and we're working there. We have the same issues with Union Gas. Like, let's be honest here. This is not just the cable companies. This is Union Gas. But the only one we don't have a problem with, I would say, is Oakville Hydro, because we own them. And a call from the CAO to their CEO usually resolves things quickly.
I named Councillor Palmer, and I'll come back to the mayor in a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. My comments go back to parking as well, as it is a very growing concern in Ward 7 especially. And just to touch on Councillor O'Mara's comments, I'm not sure if this would also go through the bylaws. But my question is, for the parking review that's taking place in North Oakville, are we looking at anything besides the on-street permits? Is there any other review being done? Because I see that, and I'm hearing from a lot of residents, as the construction comes to an end and their streets are starting to finalize, there's no parking signs on both sides of the street. So you can imagine during the holidays when there's a lot of visitors and guests, and you have these streets that are very similar to the streets that we have south of Dundas, where there's parking allowed on both sides of the street, and it's becoming very difficult to explain to residents that have moved in to this new area why there's no parking available on both sides of their street. So I'd like to understand, and maybe if there is going to be a review onto, you know, what kind of criteria we're using, because there's not a school in sight, there's no parks in sight. So I mean, I can understand for the areas where there's schools and there's visibility issues and we don't want cars on the road, but in these areas it's definitely a growing concern as to no parking at all on both sides of the street.
So the short-term review would look at what type of property or parking standards you would apply to the project development. So that would look at the amount of visitor spaces you have, for example, in a residential development, the number of spaces you have for the tenants, accessibility and usability of those two, which has been another issue that we've been seeing. In terms of the midterm work and looking at the on-street parking, it would look at the permit parking process itself, but we would have to look at where are we providing for parking on the street and whether or not there's any opportunities to do that, to increase that amount of supply. North Oakville was planned in a way that a lot of the parking on the street was encouraged. In fact, when we do a development application, we actually evaluate to see how much parking, on-street parking you can fit, because there is obviously a limited amount of parking in the driveway.
Right.
So that is a specific analysis that we do. It also contributes to traffic calming through the community. So getting as much on-street parking on the street is an important piece that we need to look at, and if we've got impediments to that, with no parking signs or no stopping, those are the things that we'd be looking at through that review.
Okay. Thank you. And just to touch on the traffic calming. So on slide 41, it outlines the annual budget of $164,000 for traffic calming, and then the $1.45 million for in the capital budget. What does the 164, like what kind of measures does the 164 go towards? I see the breakdown for the 1.45. So I'm just interested in what kind of measure, because I'm surprised that number hasn't increased, because traffic calming is also another concern that is on the rise and all across Oakville, actually. So I'm surprised that 164 hasn't increased over the year. And then just going to the capital project highlights, the traffic signal construction program. There's a budget of $1.5 million. I'm just interested in knowing if that's the same as for the pedestrian signals, or if it's something different.
So to answer your last question first, it is the same budget.
Okay.
And going back to the first part of your question, the types of the 164 would cover things like traffic cushions, actually elements on the street, construction elements on the street. We usually take a report through to council at the beginning of the year. We've been trying to back that up a little bit, which we have not done this year, to actually start to identify what are the specific programs that would be covered off by that 164 within the budget. The challenge with traffic calming, and that's why those 4 reports are so important, is that many of the traffic calming is moving to our collector, our minor collector, our collector roads, which need to be traffic calmed in a different way. I'm trying to understand how that is done, what are the tools and tactics being used to that, is part of the work that we're doing within those 4 studies that are there. So that's slowed down our ability to bring forward. So how are we going to use that 164? Because it's on those more difficult streets.
Right, and so if we're putting a budget towards the collector roads, we're obviously taking away then from the smaller in streets within subdivisions as well.
We would be. We do look at the priority in terms of the impact through public consultation. What we see as priority ones, we do have a priority ranking, which we bring forward in the report.
Okay, so you said we will be receiving a report on that. Okay, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Councillor Sandu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions, Commissioner. Going back to the Cogeco piece, when they're stringing their wires across the street or through, I guess in between streets, do we ever get hit back with potential construction trucks going by and damaging Bell or Cogeco's cables? Do they ever come back to us and say, you have to pay for this town because it was your people constructing? Do we know that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. They are strung pretty low sometimes, and I know that construction trucks are obviously abundant in Ward 7.
And I'm getting a head nod from Darnell. No,
so
it's not something.
Fair enough. So maybe not out to the public that they'll start thinking about it now that I've mentioned it. And then the other piece that Councillor Palmer was just touching on about parking. My concern, and definitely both of us have heard this from our residents in the area, parking specifically around the school on 60 Mile in Ward 7 at Udinawi Public. My understanding is that the Halton District School Board is issuing parking passes for the teachers to park during the day. On the street. My concern is, and continues to be, that those parking passes are taking away residential parking. Has there been any discussion with the school board specifically to help them potentially either increase their own parking so that we're not taking away from residential parking?
Not as yet. We were intending to have a conversation with the school boards because they also offer a supply of parking in the off hours of the school, which may provide for some offset. Okay. So that is one of the tactics that we're looking at.
Is that currently happening in Ward 7 to your knowledge? Or,
No.
Okay.
No.
I was going to say,
no,
that
because
residents are being
we also have agreements with the school boards to use those facilities. So there is some activities that happen in the school that we need to also recognize. But really the question to them and the discussion with them, is there an opportunity for some surplus parking within their lots that we could provide for some of those solutions to parking in North Oakville specifically.
So during our review of the North Oakville parking plan, if the intention is for us to encourage parking on the street, then I'm challenged with understanding why we're charging for overnight parking passes. If the idea is for us to encourage parking on the street, then we shouldn't be charging folks to be able to park on the street in front of their house. And I think that that's just something that I'm very confused about. If we can come back to that when we're going through and reviewing the program, that would be beneficial to me. And then just last thing, I may have missed this in the budget book. Do we have any idea as far as what areas the traffic calming and signals are going to be implemented in yet?
No, not yet. That's the report we'll bring forward early in 2019.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Okay, Councillor Healthy.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your report. So I have questions in about 4 areas. Property standards. So I may have misunderstood in the budget, but it looked to me like the increase in the fee or the fine being for property standards was less than what I was seeing in recreational increases in fees. So I wondered why that was, and part of that also being what is our strategy to deal with violations on property standards and if possible do more than cost recovery for those that just are not maintaining their properties.
We are undertaking a major review of the municipal enforcement fees in 2019. There's been a number of new programs that's been added to that program area. And so the intent is to do full cost recovery and not more than that, because we really can't do more than that. So it is a full cost recovery program, and we're going to rationalize that through 2019 to ensure we have. Which is why I think you've seen the increases not as much in property standards or the other bylaws and bylaw enforcement, because we need to really undertake that review. In planning, building, and development engineering, we have quite extensive models that look at, and I mean full cost recovery for anyone who touches that process. Use of the building, a desk, a chair, a laptop, all of those things are included in that full cost recovery. That same type of modeling system we have in part through municipal enforcement, but we need to make sure we've pushed that right out to the full model.
So just as a follow-up to that, so we currently ask somebody, property's not being maintained, it goes out and there's a contractor may come in to bring that property up to standard. Are we allowed to recoup and have that work done in-house, or does it always have to be contracted out?
I'm looking back at Jim to, it can be either.
Okay, great, thank you. On bylaw enforcement again, sorry Jim. So I just want to confirm that what's in the budget gives us 24/7 bylaw enforcement support.
So for this particular year in 2019, we're looking at bylaw support not at a 24/7 time period. We are trying out and looking at the extended hours, so much earlier in the morning to much later in the evening, 11 o'clock I think is the time frame we're looking at. Because when we've looked at the data in terms of the questions, inquiries, concerns that are coming in, those are the time periods they're coming in at. So for 2019, we're covering off those periods. We're going to look at that to see what's the benefit of moving them to the 24/7. So we're rolling out the municipal enforcement strategy in a staged way.
Does it cover 7 days a week?
It covers 7 days a week. Yes.
Just as a follow-up to Councillor Elger's great question around consultants, and it's great to hear that there's a strategy in place to optimize the talent within the town's team. Could you also report back how that reduction in consultant fees may impact the FTE numbers? So does it play out in terms of an increase in headcount?
I'm assuming that it's more of a cost avoidance rather than an actual reduction, but we'll certainly look into that when we report back.
And my last question is about, you report a stat on bike paths and obviously alternate transportation. There's lots of people who speak up about it. And we do very well when you look at the metrics that have been provided. But where would I find the dollars that are being allocated to advance or make progress or more progress on the alternate transportation system?
So there is a report, there's one active transportation master plan that we have just updated recently. There's also a report that we bring forward on an annual basis that identifies not only through the active transportation budget amounts, but through other types of road programs, all the improvements that we're making to our active transportation. So I think that's the best source. So each year there has been a report on that, and there will be a report on that coming in 2019, early part of 2019.
Okay, but for clarity, is in the book, is there anything that really targets and says this is the amount of dollars that are being allocated to support that strategy?
There are specific dollars, and we can outline that in a little bit more detail in probably the report that's coming forward on the active transportation. So there's those specific amounts dedicated to active transportation, but a lot of the capital program improvements on roads that we're doing that include an element of active transportation to it. So a lot of those costs are buried within those specific projects. So that's what the report tries to do, is pull out. We know these roads are being reconstructed. What are the elements that we're adding to it in addition to the funds identified specifically for active transportation?
Thanks very much.
Okay, Mayor Burton.
Thank you very much. Several of the councillors have asked questions which, both in terms of road work questions and in terms of the infill questions about, and we've gotten lots of citizen input as well on complaints about the behavior of contractors on not just road work and infill, but also in the area of parking enforcement. And our council has at the last minute balked at the idea of using our licensing tool to try to regulate the behavior of the private parking enforcement. But when it comes to the roadwork companies and the people doing infill, we don't attempt to license those operators now in Oakville, though it's anarchy for them as well as for tow trucks. And I just want to ask, could we get some order in the behavior of the roadwork companies and the infill contractors if we were to adopt a licensing approach to where you couldn't work on those projects in Oakville if you weren't licensed by Oakville, and through our licensing power, bring order to the anarchy.
So certainly we could look at that. We haven't to date looked at it, but it is an area that we could either through our normal review of the licensing or specifically at a request from council.
Well, I appreciate that ultimately council has to be the one to decide that they're willing to use the tool, and so I guess they're an audience for what I'm asking as well as staff. My next question concerns the excessive use of portables by the school boards, and my question is, when the school boards, I know that regulating the school boards around portables is a difficult proposition, but it seems to me that the portables would increase the requirement the school would have for parking. And I'm wondering if we have a way to, I mean, there's an amount of parking set for the school as it's originally applied for. And then we have a school where I believe there's now more kids in portables than there are in the building. And as far as I know, no increase in parking was physically possible. So are we begging future trouble by not requiring enough parking for the way the board appears to be going to operate? And I ask the question in a sense of urgency because the boards tell me that they are half a dozen schools behind in what they need versus what the province has been willing to approve. And you know, if we're going to grow without schools and instead we're going to have portables, in theory, to my mind, it's going to double. Well, in the case of the school that I'm thinking of, Pumalani, where there's you know, more kids in the portables, I think, than in the building, don't we need to start finding a way to require twice as much parking as we've been requiring?
I'd have to check the bylaws, both for North Oakville and for South Oakville, to see whether or not we do require additional spaces. I will assume we do, but I will check those two bylaws to make sure that the zoning standards would require additional spaces. So that's the first place. We may already have those provisions in place. Whether they're sufficient or not is another question, which we could deal with as we bring forward that short-term report on parking.
So we know on 16 Mile that we've got pressure from the school to eat up public parking. So something's wrong. Right. Okay, well, thank you for that answer. My final question is, in terms of this quest for speed that the province has put upon everybody, is there a chance to increase throughput by reducing the role or coverage of site plan committee by having more director approval and less, more director approval, fewer committee approval?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? I've got a couple, just to follow up on your PQI graphs that you've got. So am I correct in my understanding that through a review process around what the corporate standard is for the local roads, if there was going to be a financial impact from a different choice, that might show up in 2020? Next budget process.
I would actually, show up in 2020.
So
yes.
Because we're not
We'd report on it in 2019.
Right.
We'd have to reconcile that and deal with it in the 2020
Right.
budget.
So if we chose a different standard around local roads, and it meant that we would be hitting a higher percentage of, I'll say, good roads sooner, we might say that we could reapply part of the approximately $10 million a year going in farther to other things.
That's right.
Very good, thank you. Going back to the ATMP questions, there's a couple of projects where we've got funding in 2020 and 2021, but nothing in 2019. Part of that, I presume, is because we're applying that in other projects. Is that?
Yes, we have the Crosstown Trail piece that's been funded in previous years, so that's a major piece of the expansion of the active transportation network.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that because we've got these categories in the budget book, people might go, well, how come it's 0? And it might be 0 in that particular category, but there's other categories that are in this year that won't be in a future year, for example.
That's right.
Thank you very much. I think that was all I had for you at this time. We've been going now for about 2 hours. You have one more follow-up question? Okay, then I'll go to you, Councillor Sandy.
I'm sorry. 2 quick questions. One, just wanted to know about speed radar specifically. Is there any thought around increasing the amount of speed radars that we have?
The signs for there was 5 approved last year in last year's budget, so we have not included any additional ones in this budget. Okay. Photo radar is another piece that the province has been looking at, which we're following up on, which is another tool or tactic. So we haven't recommended any additional radar display signs for 2019.
Got it. And then one other last piece that just came to mind. And I know some of the other councillors are thinking about this as well, related to cannabis and enforcement. Is that piece of enforcement tracked separately as far as costs?
Well, to date, I think Jim will correct me again. We have not identified any costs to date for the implementation, the way this current government is moving forward in the implementation. So we haven't identified any costs for the town with that. Relative to however council decides on the stores, there may be some element to that, which we would report on at some later date. And I'm getting a nod from Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. I was saying that we've been going for a little over 2 hours now. I'm going to recommend that we take a little recess before we go on to the community services. I think that's probably going to take about an hour to get through, given the types of questions that are likely to show up for you. Lucky you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for all the great questions. I'm going to suggest that we just take a 10-minute break. We'll give everyone a chance to grab a glass of water, grab a cup of coffee upstairs or whatever, and then come back on down. So I see 11:46 on that clock, so let's aim for 11:56, and we're going to go. Thanks, everyone. You managed quorum very effectively. All right, we are ready to reconvene, and we are getting the next presentation up and running.
On this one?
No, this is
If members of our audience here could take their seats again, that would be appreciated. Order in the court. All rise. Court's in session.
Here, yeah.
You could have lingered 2 more minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. It looks like the Community Services Commission presentation is ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to present the 2019 Community Services Budget. As you can see, this is a list of all of the services that we provide under Community Services, and the 2 I want to draw your attention to is we also do cemeteries and harbors. This is just highlights of our 2018 accomplishments. So we started under outstanding services to the public with the opening of Trafalgar Park Community Center with our brand new Seniors Community Center that replaces the one on Kerr Street. Our seniors are delighted to be in their new facility. And also we opened Fire Station number 3 with the unique feature of a fire education center. The Fire Education Center is really a tribute to the history of the Oakville Fire Services and has been a great source of delight to both seniors and youth. Did you want to get rid of that? Okay. So further to Trafalgar Park opening, we also expanded the self-serve library services at QEP. As you know, we introduced those a couple of years ago, so we've expanded the hold lockers because they've been so popular. And we've also introduced self-serve functions for the library at 16 Mall Sports Complex in advance of the temporary library being opened in early January of 2020. We now have a new service for transit riders. They can book their rides for specialized transit online. And we also introduced, through a partnership between transit and the library, we introduced a Magnus Card mobile app to assist riders with cognitive disabilities so that they can also use transit. And it's a unique application in that it's designed from the standpoint of proven learning methods, but also combined with game design. So it's proven to be very successful, and we are the first in the GTHA to introduce it and the second in the province after the City of Guelph. We also introduced online permits for our allotment gardens, and our fire prevention team is using a mobile app to complete inspection reports while they're still on site in real time, which means that building owners are getting compliance reports at a much faster rate, so it's really cut down on the wait times. So we're finding this to be a great efficiency, which we're very pleased about. We also opened George Savage Neighborhood Park, 2 new soccer fields at Oakville Park, and introduced a new half basketball court at Hopedale Park. We also introduced youth pop-up services in North Oakville. Traditionally, what we have done is we have provided youth services in a bricks and mortar facility like Notting Hill Gate. What we're starting to test now is looking at pop-up services that may only appear for a period of time with youth, and to test what the level of interest is. So we had 2 this year that we worked on. One was at River Oaks, and that was in partnership with Holy Trinity School, and was very successful. And the other one was at 16 Mile Sports Complex. So what we had noticed at 16 Mile was that during Blades games on Friday nights, we had large numbers of youth that were congregating, and so we took the opportunity to provide programming, and it was very well received. So we are going to be looking at continuing to do this kind of pop-up service because they're low cost, they're mobile, and we can respond to emerging trends and issues related to youth throughout Oakville. We also, from an environmental leadership standpoint, we expanded the salt management plan to include town facilities and park amenities, and that is to continue to reduce the negative impact that we have through the use of salt. As you know, from 2017, we had a great deal of damage done through the flood of 2017. So 2018 was recovery. So we did a number of projects that were shoreline restoration and park amenity restoration. Specifically, we rebuilt the Bronte boat ramp in the Inner Harbor, and we also did a number of projects to restore parks to their full capacity at Tannery Waterworks, Carrington Promenade, Parkside, Dingle, and Coronation Park as well. We also initiated a successful gypsy moth and cankerworm aerial spray program, which sounds vaguely disgusting, but it saved our trees, and so we're very pleased to do that. We also continued with our EAB program. As you know, we have started to transition almost exclusively now into our woodlots. So we are in the final year of removing dead trees from our woodlots, which we're very excited about. That's 2 years ahead of what the original schedule was. We are also working very diligently to contain invasive species in our woodlots. What we're finding is when you remove the trees, sunlight comes in and buckthorn thrives. So we're trying to ensure that we're eliminating that because it will affect the biodiversity of the area if we don't. And finally, we're also doing a great deal of tree planting, as you will see in an upcoming KPI. And from an economic growth standpoint, we again provided great support for the Canadian Open, and it was a highly successful event. From our KPI outcomes, as you can see, for our minimum maintenance standard deficiencies, that we are continuing to hold our own and continuing to find that we're doing a great job in that particular area. As you know, we do citizen surveys every 2 years, so the 88% satisfaction rate is actually a reflection of the 2017 results. Under the number of active library card holders per capita, you'll notice a change between 17 and 18. And the difference is that anything prior to 18, the benchmark was based on number of cardholders who were active in the last 3 years. We're now adhering to the provincial standard, which is number of active cardholders over the last 2 years. So that's why you see a slight dip. The next one is the library collection breakdown. You will notice that, over the last 2 or 3 years that we've held very pretty steady on the split between digital products and services and print. And the reason for that, I'm sure you've seen a number of articles in the press recently that the creators of digital products have not been particularly open to the idea of special pricing for libraries, knowing that there's much higher usage. So we have found in a number of instances that digital products are prohibitively expensive, so that's why you're seeing that constant split staying essentially static. The number of public transit trips per capita is slightly down at 14.98. However, it should be noted that in 2018 we will surpass the 3 million rides mark, which we have not done since 2014. And transit's on-time performance is slightly higher at 84.5. In terms of percentage of response crew travel, this is for fire services, where you have a crew on scene 240 seconds or less. We are continuing to maintain at 65%. And the reason for this is, threefold. First of all, the number of calls in North Oakville are increasing. We have continued to experience problems with traffic congestion, and also there's been slowdowns because of construction projects that have been ongoing throughout the region. When you look at the World Council on City Data, where fire sits is at 16 out of 51 participating municipalities. Number of fire-related injuries per 100,000 population is sitting at 3.5, and that's essentially, those are citizen injuries, and that's related to 2 specific fires at the same location. Participant hours for recreation programs per capita is continuing to hold at 20, and the recreation program capacity rates are slightly higher at 75%, and that's an area that we're going to be reviewing as part of our recreation and culture service review. The number of kilometers of trails has increased to 230 in 2018, and the number of trees and shrubs planted is at 48,505. So I wanted to draw your attention to this particular set of KPIs. If you will notice that in 2015 and 16, there's a huge jump. And the reason for it is there's 2 factors. One is prior to 2016, we only had 1 planting season. After 2016, we moved to 2 planting seasons. We also did a very intensive service review of forestry, and we implemented a number of recommendations that increased efficiencies both in our internal operations and also with our contractors as well, in terms of much more robust contract management. And as a result, we're seeing these types of results going forward, which we're very pleased about. 2019 initiatives under outstanding service to the public. We are hoping to introduce the UPass to Sheridan College students. They recently voted in favor of its implementation. The next phase of this process is that reports have to come to all 3 councils, because this has been a joint effort between the town of Oakville, City of Mississauga, and City of Brampton. So those reports will be coming forward simultaneously in Q1 of this year. And we will be hoping to implement starting September for the new term. The next thing is the new Palermo self-serve library location. You will notice that wherever possible, where we have underserved areas, that the library has been looking at quicker and more nimble ways of moving services into those areas in anticipation of a larger suite of services going forward. And so there is a new Palermo self-serve library location, which will be at St. Luke's Community Center, and there will also be limited programming that will also be provided there as well. We are working on the construction of the new 16-mile temporary library and are hoping to have that open in January 2020, and that will be about 5,000 square feet. And it will be a co-location with recreation and culture services. So when the library is not open, we will be providing recreation programming as well. The OPL is also launching a new website. I noticed the interest earlier in the website, so they have been doing a great deal of work with the community and are now at the point where they're reviewing design options. We are going to be constructing the Fowley and William Rose neighborhood parks in 2019 and Phase 3 improvements of South Shell Park. We will also be completing a parks and open space strategy, which focuses on two key elements. One is the new types of parks forms that would be required in areas of intensification, and also a revitalization strategy for existing parks that are older, where we have been doing active state of good repair, but the demographics of the area have changed quite dramatically. So what we are reviewing as part of that revitalization strategy is the functionality of those parks, and does it reflect what the demographics are surrounding that area and who the users are. And this is something that a number of municipalities have started to look at. We also are doing accreditation of fire services through the Commission of Fire Accreditation International. So what we will be doing is it's a form of service review, excuse me, and we will be looking at all of their services through the lens of efficiency and effectiveness. This work is particularly critical because we are now required by the province to do a mandatory risk assessment plan every 5 years, which will align with when we do our master plan, but the work that we're doing through this accreditation piece will be incredibly important. Under environmental leadership, we are updating the urban forestry management plan, and we'll be bringing a report forward to council later this year. We will be completing the harbor master plan. I know I say that every year. However, we are in the final stages where we are working on our conservation plans, because both the Oakville Harbor and the Bronte Inner Harbor are designated cultural heritage landscapes. So we will be finalizing that work and then reporting out on the harbor master plan, which is land use only, at the end of this year. We are continuing, as I said earlier, with the EAB program, and essentially all tree removal will be completed by the end of 2019, again, 2 years ahead of schedule. The next one is fiscal sustainability, and it also falls under the continuous improvement umbrella for our leadership plan. So the first one that we're working on is the street light energy usage mitigation strategy. Essentially what we're doing is we're going to be looking at a strategy in partnership with Oakville Hydro. We're going to be using the adaptive control system that is used to monitor the LED street light system, and we're going to be looking at ways that we can use that as a virtual monitor or meter of our energy savings or energy consumption. What we're doing right now is we look at historical data to determine what we should be charging going forward. But going forward, we want to look more closely at real-time data so that we can actually look at energy savings over the longer term. We are also looking at the introduction of new partnership models. So there are two areas that we are doing test models on. One is Trafalgar Park. We are entering into a partnership model with the YMCA, and what we are going to be doing is we are in the process of finalizing what the YMCA is going to deliver in the way of services and what the town is going to deliver. And this is a precursor to how we might go forward with respect to partnership models as a means by which we can do cost containment. So the YMCA is an excellent partner because they adhere to similar standards to what we do in terms of how we deliver services, and they also understand the community as well. So that is actually starting this month, and we will have an opportunity to review those learnings from that particular pilot, which will then inform the Recreation and Culture Service Review as well. Now, the Recreation and Culture Service Review has just started. To Councillor Elgar's point around consultants, we are using a consulting firm, but what we are doing is we have organized technical teams from Recreation and Culture and other departments behind the scenes. We have already done a large amount of work around review, around potential opportunities for cost savings, greater efficiencies, and customer service improvements. About 120 ideas have already been generated, and so we will be working with the consultants to co-design recommendations on how we want to go forward with respect to a new model for recreation and culture. So it's been a great staff engagement piece, but also I think we've got some really practical recommendations that we will already be able to work with the consultants on in the next couple of weeks. We also have done a great deal of work around a special events service model review, excuse me. Council had given us direction last year that we were to review the special events model to look at ways to make it more financially sustainable. So what we did in the fall was we went through a lean review, both with the special events staff in Recreation and Culture and all of the other teams that are responsible for providing support to special events as well. And so now we have a series of recommendations. We are now going through an implementation plan, and we are starting work on implementing a number of recommendations as soon as possible, because we will then be able to actually achieve some time savings, which is one of the big issues for our special events team. They're a small but mighty team, and we need to find ways to better manage their workload. So we're doing work there as well, and then after that we will also be looking at whether or not there's opportunities for rates and fees going forward. We will also be tabling the cemetery strategic plan with options for Council's consideration, and that will be in Q1 of 2019. And then I know this is something that's close to Councillor O'Meara's heart. We will be working on the Harbour Business Plan, which will actually encompass both the operations for Oakville Harbour, Bronte Inner Harbour, Bronte Outer Harbour, and we will be looking at all options as part of that process, and we will be working in close consultation with all of the boating groups as well. Our gross operating budget, as you can see, community services represents 54.3% of the overall corporate budget, and our net is 64%. When you look at our gross operating budget and how it breaks down in terms of expenses, it's obvious that our biggest expense is personnel services and benefits. Our internal expenses and transfers at 13.3% are things like fleet maintenance that is done on behalf of all of our shops. Purchase services represent at 13.2%, represents things like arborist services and also winter control. And then material and supplies at 11.7%. If you look at the breakdown of our operating budget from a departmental standpoint, at the gross operating level, emergency services Recreation and Culture is the largest at 21.2%, followed by emergency services at 20.3%, and infrastructure maintenance at 19.5%. When you look at the net operating side, emergency services is at 28.6%. Oakville Transit is at 18.4%, and infrastructure maintenance is at 17.8%. So those are our biggest consumers of the budget. When you look at community services tax levy by program, the largest remains emergency services, followed by Oakville Transit and infrastructure maintenance. As part of this agenda, there are 3 reports that are on. The first one is the expansion of the leaf collection. So we did quite a bit of work behind the scenes and expanded the data sets that we will be using to determine when we either introduce new services into an area or that we are expanding the services of an existing zone. And so we are going to be adding a number of data sets from forestry, specifically the number of trees, canopy volume, and canopy cover. And so we will be speaking further to that report a little bit later. You also asked for a report on specialized transit. So the report contains the legislative framework under which specialized transit is required to operate and what are the constraints under that legislation. It also speaks to how specialized transit is operated, particularly from the standpoint of the use of fleet. As you're aware, we use a combination of internal fleet and we also use taxis, and the reasons why we have that mix to ensure that we're operating in as cost-efficient manner as possible. And also there's a report on the user fee increases for grass sports fields. As many of you are aware, a number of our sports organizations have expressed concern about the accelerated rate in which the user fees are coming in and have asked for an opportunity for the time duration to be extended a little bit, so the report speaks to that. The last one is an information request that you asked for, which is the comparative municipality fire services costs. So we just happen to have this chart for you for your review. So you will see that Oakville, out of 7 comparative municipalities, sits in second place. Cost per capita is $189. One thing I did want to mention, to put a little bit of context onto these numbers. So for example, you look at Richmond Hill, the population is very similar, the size is smaller, and they're at a much lower level, but they have 2 fewer fire stations than what we do. If you look at Burlington, who is our adjacent neighbor, they operate on a different model, which is a blend of paid staff and volunteers, because they have a volunteer station in the northwest part of Burlington, and also they have fewer specialty vehicles that they are required to staff. Under the capital budget, these are our top 12 projects that we are working on. As you can see, Southeast Oakville Community Center is the single biggest project that we have, followed by Fire Station 8. One that I did want to point out is River Oaks. We were hoping to actually extend the life of the Slab B ice rink by 2 years. We had to move it forward because the ice rink had different ideas, and it decided it would die a terrible death in 2018. So we are actually having to replace that 2 years earlier than we had hoped for. As I said, the EAB program is in its last year of tree removal. And also we are working on the town square rehabilitation, which is designed to align with phase 1 of the lakeshore construction. One piece I just wanted to clarify, which might not be clear, is the Glen Abbey Creation Hub and renovation is actually at the library. If you remember, about a year and a half ago, we introduced the first creation zone at Iroquois Ridge to really promote digital literacy. It's been hugely successful. On the first day, we had 1,500 people show up, so we sensed that the community was excited. And given that Glen Abbey is our busiest library, we felt it was most appropriate that a second creation zone go in there. And as I said, it will be open in January 2020. The budget breakdown by department. Recreation and Culture, because it's Southeast Community Center, is obviously the largest, followed by Parks and Open Space, and Oakville Transit for replacement vehicles. The 29 budget by category, 32% of our capital budget is infrastructure renewal, 19% is growth related, so new parks, new trails. Strategic priorities is 9%, which is predominantly the EAB program, and then community enhancements, we've invested 38%. Staff are here to provide more detailed information that you may require, but we're all happy to answer any questions you might have.
Very well, let's begin with Councillor Delmer.
Thanks very much for the presentation. make a big difference for everybody in the community, because you're really the community-facing group, it turns out, of what people use. Going forward, will we make sure that staff are involved in contracts that are given out? And I'm relating it to tree planting. This past year, a huge number of trees were planted on the, laid out on boulevards. It was like putting them in an easy bake oven. Then found out there was nothing in the contract put into place to water those trees. So I'm wondering, going forward, are we going to have staff involved with any contracts that are done so that this doesn't happen again?
So staff are always involved in the development of RFPs that go out. I think in the instance that you're talking about, it was the first time we'd ever dealt with a situation like that, because it was so surprising. It was so different than any other contractor that we dealt with before. So whenever we have any type of situation with any type of contractor, when we send out a new RFP, we always review what lessons learned from previous experiences, and we try to ensure that we bulletproof our RFPs going forward. So that will certainly be a consideration.
That's good to hear. I'm sure we got a much better price, but if you take a look at those trees that are dead, I think the price wasn't so good. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you're going to plant a tree, you need a little water in the hole. And now when you get into the water in the hole, the size of the hole, we went through a long exercise in coming up with a good tree planting code to make sure we had so many cubic meters of soil. Mm-hmm. So that we didn't have trees that are root bound, especially in the clay in everything north of Iroquois Ridge, which is just, it's brutal. Are we doing the cubic meters we should be doing when we're planting a tree?
Staff are very diligent on that, and they certainly, when we're working with contractors, they will do spot checks of their work as well to ensure that's happening.
Okay, I'll help them out there again. The region. Do they follow our same planting guidelines that we enforce or supposedly enforce?
Do you want, so Chris, do you want to speak to that one?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do replanting on regional roads where trees are going to be replanted. So we are following our specifications onto the regional roads at that point. When there's a new planting that's happening under contract to the region and they have a landscape component that's part of their roadwork contract, that is a specification that is within the region itself.
And it's not our specification from what I can see from the trees that are dying on some of the roads.
I think part of the problem for that too is the follow-up maintenance of those trees. The species are certainly species that we're using, but certainly the aftercare program, I think, is what you're seeing as evidence of tree mortality.
Sketchy, very. Is there anything we can do as a municipality to get the region to at least come up to our standards?
Certainly, we have talked quite a bit with the region, the operations group in the last year. Particularly on places like Bronte Road. Residents and yourself have brought to our attention the decline in mortality of trees on Bronte Road. We are working with the region. In fact, I think they budgeted this year for higher forestry costs to undertake soil renovation on areas that are going to be planted in 2019. So yes, we are talking to the region, and they are coming around to starting to plant trees, at least giving us the money to do it properly.
So in our contracts we have with the contractors who provide the trees, where they have, I think it's 2 years, they have to live for 2 years. And yes. If they don't live, they replant. Now, can we make them, they'd have to replant at a higher caliper due to the fact that we lost another 2 years? Or is
no.
That seems to be happening a lot.
That would be so hard to do because trees grow at such a different incremental rate. Silver maple will grow much faster than an oak, as an example. It may have not moved at all in that 2-year period, where a silver maple might have put on a centimeter or two. So that gets really difficult to enforce, and that's why we, like almost all municipalities, have that guarantee, and it's replacement for the same size caliper and species.
So after they do that, there's no more guarantee on that next tree that goes in. We don't get another 2-year extension, do we?
Yep.
We do?
Yep. We do. Yep.
Trouble is that it keeps going.
It does. It continues piling and piling, hence the necessary for a maintenance management program to track all that.
Okay. No, well, I really appreciate what you're trying to do. Last year, the wheels really fell off the tree planting on the boulevard.
And that contractor is no longer with us, so we have a new RFP, and as Commissioner Bell mentioned, we have very, very rigid guidelines in that now.
You've got your DNA on it?
We do.
Okay. Hey, thank you.
Perhaps Chris can hold on me. Thank you very much, Commissioner. So my question back to the key program outcomes on page 27 on your second slide there, of the 48,000 trees and 505 in 2018. Were any of those front yard or backyard trees, or the town does not do that at all? So if someone requested that, that would not happen?
So that figure, 48,000, that is trees and shrubs that we planted as part of our regeneration program with the EAB program. It'll also reflect trees and shrubs that we planted in partnership with groups such as Oakville Green. So that's what that number is for. It doesn't include municipal street trees.
Okay, so the partnership with Oakville Green, is that the LEAF program?
Yes.
So the 48,000 does not include
it's not included in that figure.
Trees that was it? I'm trying to remember the number.
Yeah, they had a request for council for $40,000, and their goal was, I believe, to plant, I think, 40 trees, backyard. This is a backyard program. They have since surpassed that significantly. We do have a report that's going to be coming back to council that gives that program, describes the results of that program. It was more successful than they initially anticipated, but those numbers are not part of this because it's not completed yet. They have a spring planting to do as well.
Okay, so comparison-wise, with respect to its costing, as Councilor Chisholm said, about $800 to $1,000 a tree, how is that in comparison if the town planted that tree in the front yard?
Certainly for $40,000, the town can plant a lot more trees than 40 trees. This program was really one for more highly educational. It was more hands-on. It was, you would have a visit by an arborist to talk to you about the planting of the tree, and it really gets back to what Councillor Elgar was talking about, is trying to make sure the tree grows. So it was very much a hands-on program. That is the LEAF program that they brought from Toronto here into Oakville.
But if you have something on your own yard, you're more likely to look after it.
Correct.
Versus if it's...
Correct. And that was specifically a backyard program, not a front yard, but a backyard program.
Okay. Thank you. I guess I'm going to come back to the Commissioner here on page 153 of tab 13, Recreation Culture Services. So the number of culture participants per 1,000 in 2017 was about 600. So 60% of our residents are participants in programs, or is that what that?
Yes, it is.
Stating. So it's not like 10% use 90% of the services. Okay, so that's thank you for clarifying. The 0.8% of citizens satisfied with our recreation and culture programs. It's a very, very good number. My question is, what is the actual response rate?
I would have to direct that to Jane Courtemanche, because that's from the citizen survey.
So we ask the 60% that use the culture recreation programs, what percentage of those people answer our surveys?
I couldn't tell you that. I do know Rec and Culture does its own user surveys. The citizen survey is a representative sample, so it's a sample of 600 residents, so it's accurate within plus or minus 4%.
I see, so two different surveys. Okay. Page 195. That's tab 16, cemeteries. How many plots are we maintaining currently? Chris, I should have probably given you a heads up on that.
Yeah, I don't have that figure on hand, but I would say it's in the thousands.
And do you know how many available spaces we have?
Currently at Trafalgar Lawn Cemetery, we have about 6 full burial plots left, and some cremation remain as well. But essentially, we're sold out. Hence the cemetery strategic plan that we're doing and going to bring it forward to council in the very near future.
Okay. Is it because of a lot of prepayment? A lot of people have bought plots that haven't used them, thank goodness.
That's correct, yes. And we just ran out of space.
I see. And just a question regarding when you buy a plot, is there a care or a maintenance part of that fee that's in perpetuity, or?
Yes, there's a legislated amount, I believe 41% has to be put into perpetual care for the future maintenance of the cemetery.
And that would be like in the reserve fund? Okay. And last question on page 227 for transit. Thank you, Christy. Just regarding the advertising, so the cost recovery ratio, 0.8, so page 227. So is the advertising, we've taken into consideration the external of the bus, the internal of the bus, and the shelter buses. So is there any opportunity to increase revenue on that side?
The team has worked really diligently to maximize the impact of marketing revenue. So I think we're really, from that standpoint, I think we're maxed out.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to actually just point to the capital reserves for a moment. I just have a couple of questions about things. BA, artificial field replacement, I'm assuming is the Bronny Athletic Field artificial
Yes, it is.
replacement? How old is that field? It doesn't seem to me like it's that old. 2010. And is that the lifespan of a field then, 8 years?
It's an artificial field,
Yeah.
so the wear and tear on it is fairly significant because it's one of the few that we have.
Right, and then there's also some money allocated for nautical park renewal, and I'm wondering what that means.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor, that is replacement of the rubberized surface at the playground and splash pad.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it needs that. Okay, thanks. And then lastly here is for the harbor's equipment replacement. Over the next 3 years, there's about $500,000 allocated for equipment replacement for the harbors. I'm just wondering if we can explain what that is. And then every year for the next 10 years, all the way up to about $1 million worth of equipment that we're replacing. So I'm wondering what that is, what that entails.
That would be certainly all, because we have an asset management program now, we put life cycles on all of our equipment and assets. So that would include everything from docks to trucks to all the equipment that we use within the harbor. So that could be everything from the travel lift to trailers to tow motors. It's a range of equipment there, yes.
So almost everything is going to be replaced in the next 10 years, or?
No, certainly not. It's based on the age and the life cycle that we've determined for the equipment. That's something also that we're going to be looking at as part of the harbor's business plan as well.
Okay.
And just because it's up for renewal doesn't mean it gets renewed. It's looked at each year on a year-by-year basis.
Okay. Yeah. No. I noticed I know that some of these are just used as placeholders, but
correct.
Just, you know, when you look at where the gaps are in the numbers and you just see consistent numbers over 10 years, you kind of we're backlogged a bit, or.
So one of the issues with the harbor business plan that we'll be working on is the rationalization of what equipment stays. And because we have more than one travel lift and we have some duplicate equipment, so that will be part of that discussion, and then the budget will be adjusted accordingly.
Perfect. And I think, Mr. Chair, we're going to have a minute to get into some of the other items later. Is that correct?
Yeah, the other items that are on the agenda, we'll come back
okay.
to them because some of them have specific staff comments.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleague, thanks for the presentation. A couple questions, or probably more statements with respect to the Parks and Open Space Strategy and also the Harbor Master Plan. what has been happening as part of the whole waterfront. Let's use the waterfront in its entirety through Oakville, and that'd be Ward 1, 2, and 3. We're getting a lot of feedback and challenges for users of people who want to go into the lake. Whether it be Lost, which is the Lake Ontario swimmers team, and we've got canoe, and we've got sailing and so forth. When we are looking at those considerations in the strategic plan, that we involve those user groups at a high level with respect to access to the water. We've done wondrous jobs and operations on our water, and you see with Tannery Park and so forth and water. Now we're inviting people down, but there are people who want to go into the lake. So I think this is really important for consideration. We've had some discussions with some of the user groups, and we just want to make sure we're on record that that'd be part of the process. And the other part that might be buried, I had a discussion with Chris maybe a year ago, again about accessibility and to the beach areas, of whether it be Coronation Park or even in some areas where they can get down to the water for wheelchair accessibility. I know there are parts of operations now that have access in municipalities down to the water. So I would like to see some consideration with that within the strategic plan, and if it becomes a budget consideration for 2020, that's fine. Okay. The other, thirdly, is the leaf pickup. I know you've got a report, so I might hold my comments with that because of some of the challenges we've had on the operation itself this year. So I think, Mr. Chair, I'll hold those comments or questions till later. Thank you.
Councillor Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bell, I have a few questions. Maybe I'll start with your slide deck. So on slide 32, or sorry, page 32, with your capital project highlights, you mentioned North Oakville Neighborhood Park number 3. Is that in direct relation to the two parks that you're talking about on page 28, which is Fowley and William Rose?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then the other piece that I'm looking at is tab 13 in the budget book, page 155. And I'm seeing a reduction in the budget for the 16-mile hub and the Iroquois Ridge hub. Those two hubs are directly used by Ward 7 residents on a regular basis. And I'll be very frank with you, we're hoping for an increase in budget in those specific areas, more so from a 16-mile perspective, since we just don't have enough programming in the area right now. Can you help me understand where the reduction is coming from and what we're going to be losing?
So what we had done is we had looked at things that aren't as efficient. So if, for example, there was a program that was underutilized, we moved the part-time hours elsewhere, or we looked at efficiencies back of house. So as much as possible throughout our commission, when we were looking at efficiencies, we tried to ensure that we were reducing as little service as possible, or we were repurposing it to be more impactful in another area. So that's what we were looking at.
So the reduction in cost, just to be clear in my mind, the reduction in cost is specifically related to internal cost and not the reduction of programming?
Very little programming.
Okay. Do we know offhand what programming was reduced?
I couldn't say specifically, but I could certainly get that for you.
Please. And then help me understand a little bit better the increase to 132% of that change budget for Trafalgar Park. Is that directly related to the fact that it's now open and it has additional services?
So I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Sure. So I'm seeing 132% increase for Trafalgar Park.
So for Trafalgar Park, what we did was we had to annualize the costs. And once we'd done that, then we looked at ways that we could be more creative in delivering service. And that's why we are doing the pilot with the YMCA. Okay. So the YMCA delivers some service and we deliver some service. And the services we do, we ensure that we're maximizing our revenue return.
And if we, at some time, and this was before my time, so forgive my ignorance when it comes to this, but there was at some time a pitch for a YMCA project north of Dundas as well. Mm-hmm. Have we explored other types of resources and programs like that for north of Dundas as well?
At this time, the one that we have focused on the most is the temporary library, where we're doing a partnership with Recreation and Culture. One of the reasons why we're doing the pilot with the Y in the south is that it's slightly more contained. We're able to learn more from it, and then going forward, it will inform any sort of partnership that we might want to do with them in the north. So, because otherwise you're negotiating on a grand scale and you haven't developed the relationship yet. So this way it's contained, we know what our lessons learned are, and that will help inform any future negotiations that we want to do with them.
What's your pilot timeline for the Y there?
So the pilot timeline for Trafalgar is it's starting now, and it will be going through for at least 6 months. We're hoping for it to continue longer, but we thought we would start small, and then we will review what the lessons learned are and what worked well and what didn't. Because one of the things that we're looking at with them is they will be providing some direct service to local residents. They are also looking at doing a combination of rental as well. So we will see how that impacts our bottom line and how it ensures a really wide menu of offerings.
And how long would your review process take after your 6-month pilot?
We would be doing it fairly quickly because we want it to inform the Recreation and Culture Service Review, and that's due in May. So we would probably be looking by the end of March as to how it's operating. Certainly from an operational standpoint, we would be looking at, what do we need to fine tune, what do we need to change completely, those kinds of things. But it's a great way to test the waters for something much bigger.
And my other questions are kind of more general. On page 162, I noticed that there's a bunch of classifications for growth. Can you help me understand what growth means when it comes to the 16-mile community center?
So growth, it refers to how it is actually funded, and it's funded through development charges.
Okay, so the growth is then funding that specific piece. So, and then I just want to, just for clarity's sake, it's not necessarily a community center right now, it's a sports complex.
So the plan was always that there would be the sports complex, which is the Fort Pat Arena, that there would be a library attached to it, and that there would be a full community center attached to it as well. If you look at the Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan, it clearly articulates the amenities that it proposes should be considered for a community center there. So the sports complex was actually built with the understanding that there would be attached facilities going onto it, and there are energy efficiencies that are built in that once the other part of the complex comes on board, we will be able to actually achieve. So it was always intended that it was actually going to be a very large sports and library and culture complex.
So now that you mentioned the community center, if we're thinking about timelines specifically for those other pieces, what have you marked out for community center for 69?
So the library and we actually had looked at the possibility of the library being built sooner. However, we ran into some challenges with that from an architectural, and because the library is actually supposed to be built facing onto the road, and the community center is supposed to be attached to the sports complex. So it made it a little bit awkward in terms of how we might want to construct it. So right now we have proposed for 2027, opening 2028.
For the community center piece?
Yeah.
And why have we pushed back so far?
Well, a number of reasons. The first one, we had a study done a couple of years ago by John Frittenberg, and what we asked him to do was we asked him to look at how we might, the intent was to actually accelerate when the community center could be built potentially. If we looked at a partnership, what would that partnership look like, and how would it impact our operating capital budget? And it also looked at if we accelerated the opening of the community center through partnership, what would the impact be on existing facilities? So what came out of that report, which was tabled with council through a partnership report, this I believe in April of 18, it stated that the population growth was moving at a much slower rate than had originally been anticipated when the 16-mile community center was first proposed, and it was impacting if we were to build in an accelerated time frame, we would actually lose money at our other facilities because we would not be drawing new residents, we would be redistributing residents from other facilities. So some of our programs could potentially operate at a loss. So what he had said as part of the recommendation that we should not build sooner than 2026 because of the population growth not moving at the speed that we had hoped for, and that we should try and as much as possible with respect to timing avoid any possibility of losses being generated throughout the department as a result of bringing on new capacity.
I'd like to see some additional information specifically around the report related to growth and also kind of timelines. Generally, we have a severe need in our ward for additional programming and additional facilities. We're overloading currently Glen Abbey, Iroquois, and River Oaks. And I think those facilities are really bursting at the seams and feeling that stretch. So I think myself and Councillor Farmer would enjoy that information. And then the last piece is actually a side to that. My question is around trails and different kind of bike trails and things like that, and walking trails. On page 187, I see some capital budget information there. I realize that we have some biking and regular trail maps, but do we have anything that's overlaid with what we're anticipating coming up in the next few years?
I don't think we do, but it's certainly something that we could look at. I think that would, the community would probably really like that.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly a very popular amenity.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, do you have questions? Okay.
Thank you for the report. I just have one question, and it's probably just a question of clarification. On page 32, my numbers are all cut off, under your capital project highlights, you have town square rehabilitation for 1.8 million. And that number also shows up on page, I think it's 17, with James' report. So I just was wondering, are they two separate numbers, or the same number for the budget in two different areas?
It's the same number for the budget in two different areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Chair Adams. Sorry I missed your presentation, Commissioner Bell. I do have a couple of comments I wanted to make. Just in relation to Councillor Sandhu's comments on the 60-mile sports complex, what is that population target number? I'm interested in actually, I mean, if you could send me a copy of that report that was done a couple of years ago. I'm interested in knowing the number, the threshold that we need to reach in order to have a community center where we're not losing money. And I'm interested in also knowing, I know it was previously slated in the budget from 2024 to 2026, and now it's been pushed out. Is that because of, again, the population, or is it just other capital priorities that are taking precedent?
All of the above.
Okay. Okay. Do you happen to know that number offhand?
Well, normally the ratio is 1 to 45,000.
Okay. Okay, great. And I do have another question, and forgive me if it's already been answered because I wasn't here for a portion, and I'm happy to have the conversation offline as well in the interest of time. But I was wondering, is there any public consultation when it comes to neighborhood parks? And the reason I'm asking is for Fowley Park and William Rose Parks, which are both substantially large parks, and in Ward 7 we have George Savage Park and the complex grounds as well. And the reason I'm asking is I see a lot of pickleball, and I know there's a lot of pickleball fans in here, so I don't want to offend anybody. But in North Oakville, and I'm not sure if maybe Councillor Lischan and Councillor Adams have also heard several requests for a cricket field. So I'm wondering, did we consider a cricket field for either of these new parks, William Rose or Fowley? Because my concern is that we're putting in the same services at the parks, and that they may be underutilized, and we're not really meeting the requests of residents. There's a changing demographic in Oakville as well. And it's a very popular and growing sport. And I know later on we're going to talk about the cost of fees for sports field, and I know that lots of our residents travel to neighboring cities for tournaments, cricket tournaments. So it could also be an opportunity for income in that sense, where if we did have a cricket field somewhere in North Oakville, that we could definitely use that as an opportunity. So I'm just wondering, has it been considered for either of these new parks that are being developed in North Oakville?
So cricket is very high on our radar, and we've actually been looking for a permanent site since I've been here. So that's something that we are trying to figure out how to actually plan for. With respect to parks planning, we always consult with the community. We recognize that, particularly in North Oakville, the interests and uses are changing, and so consultation becomes really important. We're also noticing that there is a substantial change in sport popularity. So, for example, soccer is flatlining, hockey is flatlining, baseball has flatlined a bit. We'll see if the Jays give them a little bit of a bump. Basketball has become incredibly popular, and some of it is tied to the success of our teams like the Raptors. But we are getting requests for different types of sports, so we take that into consideration when we are implementing any type of parks design. So rest assured, the community will be consulted.
So just to clarify then, the designs for William Rose and Fowley are not final? There's still going to be public consultation?
I don't believe so. There's still opportunity for input.
Okay, I'll let my residents know. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Knoll.
That was quick. Thank you very much. And I apologize too for missing the presentation. I was listening on YouTube while I had to leave for my hour sojourn. We heard earlier about the impact on our cultural and recreation services regarding the changing demographic in Oakville, and we talked specifically, and we just talked a moment ago about cricket. I've had a lot of recent commentary from the Chinese Canadian community that seems to be choosing Oakville as a new home. And they're interested in ping pong and recreation centers. Is that something that you have on your radar? Is it something we can expect in the near future? Because I know that they're very anxious to see one of their favorite pastimes incorporated. Ping pong has started to come up as a sport of interest because it is low impact, and it's one that we would be able to accommodate relatively easily. Is that something that needs to be accommodated through the budget process, or can you simply accommodate that through your ongoing operational? I can get back to you on that one. I'll speak to the recreation and culture staff and see what would need to be done. But I would doubt strongly that it would be a huge cost. Yeah, I would agree. You'd make a growing component of our community very happy if you could act on that quickly. Thank you. Okay.
Councillor Elgar,
yeah, thank you. Time is running out, but on the issue of the Glen Abbey Library, which is the busiest library in Oakville, is closing and it won't be opening until, did I hear January 2020? It will not close until the temporary library is open. So we will be doing two things to ensure that residents still continue to receive library services. One, we will have a small sort of holds locker at Glen Abbey proper, so that anyone who just wants to come in and grab a book or drop a book off can still do that. We had the same arrangement at Iroquois when Iroquois was closed, and it was very successful. But because Glen Abbey is of a significant size, and it is our busiest library, that was the reason why we looked at putting in the temporary library in the north. And so it's all timed to when that opens, that's when Glen Abbey will close temporarily. And that's why I asked the question, because I thought I heard that the temporary library wasn't going to open until 2020, but I heard that wrong. No, I'm sorry, I apologize if I confused that. No, it's the actual creation zone and renovated library reopens in January. Okay, but the temporary library will open, I believe it's June of this year. Okay, thank you, appreciate that, thanks very much.
Okay, sure. Yes, Councillor Knoll, go ahead.
Can I just ask for clarification? Are we not also opening some resources at St. Luke's Church.
Yes, we are.
To also help in this particular circumstance?
Yes, we are. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, there will be a hold locker at St. Luke's Community Center as well, but we will also be doing limited programming.
And on this matter, having lived through the Iroquois Ridge closure to do the renovation of and reopening, I'd say that we heard feedback of concern that, hey, how come you're closed for so long? But by and large, I think it went as smooth as you might expect it to go. And upon reopening, we're generally pretty happy with the outcome. So, yes, it was a little bit painful to live through the renovation, but you have to do it. If there are no other questions, I have a couple of questions that I want to bring up. Could you just repeat, there was a question that came up about how many people is required to support the 16 mile?
So the ratio in the master plan is 1 to 45,000, give or take.
Well, I only asked for that because some of us at the table here weren't quite sure we heard you correctly. Yeah. Then I have a couple of other things. We had some discussion about tree planting. Could you give us a sense of what's the cost per tree planted when we do it ourselves? Because we had a really big number in the report, and then there was some discussion about whether they included the street trees or whether it just included the reforestation replantings. And if there's a differentiation between what's it cost to do a street tree for us versus what's it cost to do reforestation.
Through you, Councillor Adams. The numbers are for the regeneration program that are in the slide. The cost to plant a street tree from a contractor is in the range of around $450. And in terms of the regeneration that it's kind of day and night in terms of the tree planting. The trees we're planting on the street are usually about a 45 to 50 millimeter caliper tree, which is about 1.5 to 2.5 inches. The trees that we're planting in our woodlot program are whips, so they're like that. So they're very tiny. So the price is a couple of dollars per tree, based on that.
So a wide discrepancy, and the reason I ask is that I understand Oakville Green is going to be coming forward to ask for a continuation of their program. And I think we ought to know what the relative cost is to do that kind of tree. And I think it's a little bit more like the street tree planting as opposed to the whips that we're doing in the regeneration program.
Correct.
And so we're going to be doing fair comparisons. That's more of a fair comparison.
Yeah, if you look at their program, they're planting more of a street tree type tree that we would plant.
Thank you for that. Then I had a couple of questions. One around staffing levels in community centers. I think we touched on it a little bit in the conversation about the Volker Park. And you touched a little bit on it in your presentation around the efficiencies that we are looking for within our programs and within our centers and how to distribute staffing more appropriately to reduce our staffing costs overall and to apply our staff that we have to the right places at the right time. Can you describe that a little bit more?
So the Recreation and Culture Service Review is going to undertake to review all aspects of our operating model. So that will include what our mix is, and what I mean by mix is, right now we do almost exclusively direct service. So we actually provide the programming. We have some partnerships. So for example, Oakville Soccer Club, we have a partnership. Oakville Gymnastics Club and Skate Oakville. So they actually provide services so we don't have to provide them. And then we have sort of joint partnerships where we worked with the Y on a variety of initiatives where we provide, a part of a service and they provide another part. So what we're looking at doing is looking at that mix to see what the mix could be to ensure that we're more financially sustainable. We're looking at more innovative ways of delivering. We're also looking at ensuring that our cost recovery is robust. And we're also looking at things like formalized thresholds to determine whether or not a program should proceed or not. So to ensure that we're hitting capacity rates
that will ensure cost recovery. So it's taking a very robust view of what our operating model should be. And as I said earlier, we have 3 technical teams that have already done a great deal of work around this and have identified opportunities where we believe that we can really achieve much better efficiencies and savings. So we're really looking forward to the outcome of this review.
And that includes, for example, for an example, concession stand staffing versus front desk staffing.
So, for example, I'm glad you brought up concessions. We are actually going to review whether or not we should be in the concession business at all. And if we are in the concession business, what's the level that we would be at? Because concessions are not one of our best areas of operation, for example. So we're taking the whole thing apart and looking at it right down to, if you to use a construction term, right down to the studs.
Great, thank you very much. I have one other parks-related question, and that's late last year we referred to the committee the Wales Boulevard Parkette just up the corner here. Do you have an opinion on how best to handle that in terms of having staff consider where it might fall in a 10-year capital plan? Recognizing that Councillors Janet and I just recently had discussions with the owner of the property across the street here that want to build 2 apartment towers.
Mm-hmm. So actually, I've been speaking with Commissioner Clohessy, and one of the things that we were thinking about recommending is looking at when those developments might come online, and then align any change to the park to coincide with those developments. Okay. And then that way, because one of the things we were concerned about, if we were to put a park in right now, the demographic may not be what it is when those developments go in, and we want to ensure that the park amenities reflect who the users are that are truly in the area.
And possibly the financing of the park.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much. So because it's been referred here, does the committee need to, at a later date, ask for staff to consider an appropriate date for it to be inserted into a 10-year capital plan as part of the deliberations?
So I think what would be appropriate is for us to work closely with planning, because what we can do is at the appropriate time put it into the capital forecast so that it reflects the timing.
And that's, I think, the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah.
Very good. One last question. It's only for you. Probably should have gone to Gord when he was up, and it deals with the town hall feasibility study for this building itself. There's $250,000 that's planned in the budget, and I wonder whether it would be appropriate to delay it, given that the road project that's going to take out this building isn't even in the capital plan yet. It would allow us to see what happens as time goes on to figure out what the landscape looks like.
Yeah, I think that's council's prerogative. If you would like to take it out, we can easily do that. It's a strategic initiative.
Okay, so that's one that we can consider. Councilor Chair.
It's tabs that weren't mentioned in our slides before, so that's why I wasn't sure when to ask the question. This is regarding Service Oakville. So would that be cool? Okay. So you've noted that 10.8 FTEs. So this is between 8:30 and 4:30 are business hours at the town.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we operate Service Oakville actually from 8 to 5. So the staffing, a lot of those hours are covered, and the rest of the time is covered through a third-party call center.
Has the calls in the after hours, are they increasing, or are they become? My point is do we have staff in the middle of the day who are not getting calls versus after-hour calls?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we measure that and do an assessment of that. So all of the staffing well, there are some full-time staff, a lot of the part-time staff is designed to cover peak hours. So we do move the staffing around so that there isn't the downtime. In the after hours, at this point, it is more cost-effective to use a third-party service.
And these are pretty impressive KPIs with respect to getting back to people. With respect to after hours, Are we also expecting the company to, so they're not holding online for 2 minutes or that kind of thing? Those are the same KPIs we're using? Okay. And one last question about number of followers on town social media sites. That seems to be growing as well, over 52,000 in 2018. Now, is that a combination of all the different, so you've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Are the 52,000, are those distinct people, or is it one person who can have 5 different social media accounts? Is there any way we can track that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would have to look into whether we could get individual users. Right now, it is by number of followers, so people could subscribe to multiple platforms.
Right. Well, because the KPI then really isn't a way of knowing that's, the same person using 5 different social media avenues out of this 52,000, which sounds impressive, but may not.
Well, and through you, some of the specific accounts are targeted to specific audiences. So, in fact, if you're, you might be signed up to the specialty hockey league account. That's very different information than you're going to get by following the town's official account. So, in fact, you would need people to sign up for both accounts to get all the information. They do serve different audiences.
Okay. I just would like to see a breakdown maybe of for the different social media accounts, sure. unless I missed it somewhere.
Yeah, we could get it for each account. No problem.
Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, and I don't know who to direct this to. Maybe it's Mrs. Sully. FTEs. How many vacancies do we have right now as it stands on FTEs? Oh, thanks, Gord.
We track that on a month-to-month basis, and it's hovering around 30. 30?
Yeah, I know we've had a lot of retirements at senior levels. Is the plan of senior staff or EMT to have all these positions filled by the first quarter of this year?
No. When a position becomes vacant, we have a process that we call vacancy management, and you need to make a rationale for why you want to fill that. We are hoping people will go through that process and look at alternative ways of filling those positions, and then it comes to EMT and we approve it and on it goes. So we don't have a blanket target, we treat each one individually.
So the suggestion would be under gapping, we're saving money with not replacing these or reallocations or revamping these positions in order to meet our service delivery?
There is a built-in amount that we expect to save through gapping that we actually budget for. So the replacement process takes a certain amount of time. The person leaves the organization. There's a review of the job description. It goes to vacancy management, as they said. We evaluate whether we're making the best opportunities with that job. I'm talking about a perfect world here. And then the job is posted, we recruit, there's interviewing, and then we put the person in place. That presents a gap to us, and we do budget for that.
So, with your comments on that, Gord, so I would assume when positions on retirements we've had on some senior staff, we've moved that process already. It's already in process.
It's individual. We treat them, if we have a lot of warning, then, or if we have a reasonable amount of warning, we move on that more quickly than if it's a surprise. Somebody gives us 2 weeks of notice. But it's I guess the point I'm trying to emphasize is that it's not a sort of a monolithic thing. We treat each retirement individually, and we go through this process. If we know that somebody's coming up for a critical position and they have announced the retirement, we would be moving on that quickly.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could add to that, in terms of some of the retirements that have occurred, I will be speaking to Council on February the 4th, which is the night of the strategic plan, and I'll be staying on with Council to talk about some organizational changes.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this part of our agenda? Okay. Then,
Move receipt.
Okay. The mayor's moving receipt. Members of committee, you might notice that you've got a memo on your desk as well regarding a minor amendment to the rates and fees. So I'm actually looking for not only the receipt, but also the memo dated December 20th from the Finance Department regarding the amendment to the 2019 fees, the rates and fees we received.
That's what I meant.
That's exactly what I meant. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I hear a desire to be able to stop for lunch, but I know that we've got some members of the audience here regarding the cost for user fees for playing field. And I want to be able to deal with that one so that those people who are patiently waiting can move on with the day if they wish. Staff, do you have any material that you want to present, or is the report self-explanatory? On item number 4, the increase in cost of user fees for the health field.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's self-explanatory.
Okay, very good. There might be a member of the audience here who might have an interest in it and might want to say a word about it. If so, if you care to come forward and present yourself, I'm happy to hear from you. Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dave Harris. I'm the Executive Director with the Oakville Soccer Club. We are asking today to extend the proposed user fee rates from the 7 years that's currently in place to 10 years. With that, the rationale is that we are getting, it's taking us to a point where it's becoming very burdensome on the end user, with our fees going up significantly, with, for example, going up 20% this year in terms of a fee cost increase, based specifically on the increase in field costs, which are going up this year. Paula, 27%?
This based on a 7-year, 27.5%.
27.5%. So what we're asking is to extend the period from the 7 years to the 10 years. Not that we don't want to pay our fair share, but we want to see if we can get some of the pressure taken off the organization in terms of the field costs, which are becoming extremely tough to manage.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the delegation? Councilor Chisholm.
The rental rate for, say, Class A field is how much right now?
So in 2018, the actual rental rate that we paid for A fields is $7.69.
$7
before HST.
$7.69. And how many participants are on that field on a per hour basis?
On a per hour basis.
So a game is, how long would a game be?
An hour and a half.
Okay, so an hour and a half. Got it. So it's an hour and a half. So you have, how many players do you have in the field in an hour and a half?
We would have up to 36 players.
Yeah, it's 18. Either 14 to 18 per team, depending on the age group.
Okay, thank you.
Hubert?
Can you quantify for us what the annual impact on you would be of this change you're requesting in dollars?
The impact last year to us was an increase of $76,000.
I'm asking, if we grant your request, what will be the dollar benefit to you? What will be the change in your favor?
Well, we are looking this year, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but of increasing the fees up to $20 per user. $17 of that would be fee.
Actually, we're looking to increase the registration fees, and our outdoor registration starts this coming Monday by $30, from $225 this past summer to $255, just to cover the 27.5% increase on rental rates.
So, can I take that as you either didn't understand my question or you can't answer it?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
It's going to cost us, or the taxpayer, $21,880 to grant your request. I'm wondering if that happens to coincide with the decrease in cost that you would enjoy as a result. Are we talking about a $22,000 change when it comes to your side of this equation?
I'm going to try and help out here. It doesn't coincide perfectly because the soccer club is only one of the payers of this type of fee. There's the baseball guys and all the other kind of outdoor field users that also pay this kind of fee.
But I think the soccer club is probably 75% of it or something.
That's correct.
So you're probably getting 15,000 of that.
And we're not really looking for the Oakville Soccer Club to save money. We are looking to not pass on a $30 increase to our end users. So this isn't going to increase our bottom line. We're just looking to not have to increase the fee by $30.
All right, thank you very much for your information.
Councillor Elger?
Thank you for coming today. I guess I'm trying to understand. $15,000 is probably what the increase would be for you. That's what you figure. So how many soccer players do you have to divide by to figure out what the bump is? Well, how many people register for soccer that use the field? Is there a simple way to
I think
know
specifically you're looking for the number of youth players that would qualify.
That would make up the 15,000.
Yes.
Correct?
That's right.
Is it 3,000 summer youth?
It's about 4,000 summer youth.
Let's call it 4,500.
4,500?
Yeah.
Getting better. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Councillor O'Meara?
I apologize because I'm having troubles trying to figure this out. So because of the changes in the way it is now, the soccer club is going to have to raise each individual registration $30. Is that what I'm trying to say?
For the youth, yes.
For the youth.
Yes.
But then we're just trying to figure out it's only an extra $15,000 and that's divided by 4,500 children. That doesn't seem to me to be $30 per child. So I'm wondering where the disconnect is in the math that I'm hearing from you and what we're doing here.
I'll again try and help you out. Because they're asking for an extension, a lengthening of the phasing in, you're actually still going to go from 769 to 897. So there is actually a significant percentage increase that they have to do. They would still pay.
Sure, I get that. I'm just, no matter which way you slice the pie here, I don't understand how we get a $30 increase per child because of what we're trying to do here today. Either way you go, whether it's over the 10-year or the 7-year. I'm getting a disconnect with that. Am I wrong or am I misreading the
No, I guess maybe we're not understanding the question, but in order to cover the full 50% recovery and the 27.5% rental rate that we would face in 2019, yes, we do have to increase by $30.
Okay, because the math that I did, 2018, the Class A youth was covering 20% of the costs of the field. Next year at the 7-year phase-in, it would be 26% of the cost of the field. So by the time we get in 7 years to the 50%, it's 1923, and I know after 2020 it doesn't include inflation in those other numbers. So I think we're at a disconnect in our understanding in terms of what we're going to be, you guys are going to charge next year, or just jumping up to 50% right away.
Now, I mean, I should say that $30 increase per player is not, I guess, strictly just from the field increase. We had already planned on increasing our fee just because of increase in uniforms, increase in Guildhall affiliations. I think it was $10. So we have increased an extra $20 when, I guess in November, end of November, early December, we found out that the actual rental rate was going to be 27.5% increase because of inflation and because of the increase to the minimum wage.
Right,
so
okay.
Then we went another $20.
Fair enough. So that's what I was trying to, I think the mayor was trying to get at as well, is what is the cost to you guys instead of if we charge $8.97 or $9.80, that gap of $1 or 97 cents, what's that going to cost your soccer players this summer? And I guess that's what we're trying to struggle with. Are we talking $20,000, which it is to the taxpayers, or are we only talking, is it $10,000 to you guys? Is it $5,000, $8,000 divided over 4,500 players? I'm trying to get to that number here, which seems to be struggling a little bit. So maybe our staff could help us out after on that. I'm not sure. I guess that's not really a question, but if you wish to add any clarity to that at any time from now till next week, that would be greatly appreciated.
Any other questions? Okay. I think what the committee was trying to get at was the difference, the going up from 769 to 980 was going to cost you X, whatever X was. I saw a number previously, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. And going down to 897 would save you about $15,000. Is that approximately right? So I'm guessing that the total between going from 769 to 980 was probably in the order of $30,000 or thereabouts.
Well, I guess, if you take a look at the number of players that play on the fields in the summer.
Mr. Chair.
Mayor.
The point of my question was to bring out that the request will create a benefit of about $3 a kid. And I am content with having got that eliminated. And I will move receipt of the report at the appropriate time.
Okay, I think we've answered the question satisfactorily. Is there any desire for more information? Okay. The items have been moved for, I'm just going to double check there's no individuals in the audience here that want to delegate on this. Okay, let's see. Thank you very much for your time today and your patience. All those in favor of receipt of the item? That's carried. Thank you very much. Members of the committee, do you wish to have a break or do you wish to plow through and deal with the last couple items?
I'm prepared.
I'm going to go through. Okay, there's a desire to continue through. And so we're going to go back to item number 3, the Oakville Transit Specialized Service. Staff, do you have any additional material to provide us, or is it self-explanatory? Okay, are there any questions on that? Councilor O'Meara?
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm scurrying here to get to the page. On page 19, it states here that we contract out to Medisys to go through the information about individual assessments based on need. I'm wondering how much that costs us, or what do we pay Medisys to do that service?
Through Mr. Chair, I don't have the exact number at the moment. It's a cost share arrangement between us, Burlington, and Milton. Medisys does all of the application reviews for all 3 municipalities. We account for about 52% of those applications. So our end of it would be 50% of, I think it's about $40,000.
So what I was taking from the report is we really don't have much of a say at all in terms of we have to provide this service through AODA and we're doing what we are legislatively obliged to do. Is there any point either through Medisys or anywhere else where an audit would happen on the people using the service or on the companies we're hiring to pick up on our behalf? I mean, where is our accountability on this one, or our transparency through any sort of an audit process?
Through Mr. Chair, we continuously review the files for all applicants, even those applicants that are given unconditional eligibility. We will review those based on information we receive from, for example, drivers or the taxi companies that maybe what they're observing is inconsistent with unconditional eligibility. The process of determining eligibility, Medisys looks at them first, so they review all of the applications. And the reason that they do that is they have the technical expertise, the medical expertise to do that. Prior to that, our own staff were doing it. So we tightened up the process there. If the person is determined to be ineligible, they have a right to appeal. And that's, again, as per AODA. And we established an appeal process that involves the accessibility coordinator from each of the 3 municipalities in the process, Milton, Burlington, and Oakville. All of the documentation associated with the application process is sent, along with any Medisys-related assessment documents, are sent to the appeal committee members. and then they will make a determination as to whether they agree with the Metasys assessment or they disagree. And if they disagree, they have the ability then to assign conditional, unconditional, or temporary as they see fit. From that point, we don't have an appeal, and the applicant doesn't have an appeal. That appeal process currently represents I would say, the greatest opportunity to further tighten the system, because our experience has been that it's not as the determination isn't as objective as it should be, and so I think in 2018, for example, we've had 29 appeals. Of those, 16 were ours, and of those, 11 were given unconditional eligibility. After a full review by Metasys, including in a lot of cases in-person assessments. So if there's any question at all from the assessor, the Metasys staff, we will bring the people in for an interview and an in-person assessment, and they put them through a number of different exercises to determine the level of mobility.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then just the last point on this is, how do we select the transportation company that we use? Do we put an RFP out? Do we include transportation network companies which are now legal to operate here? What is our process in terms of selecting who we contract out?
It's actually a very timely question, because at the moment and historically, we have provided service on our dedicated buses, and then any additional ride requests that we're not able to accommodate have been put out to the taxi companies in Oakville. And for the most part, it's been 2 taxi companies, and we try to distribute equally. The service has outgrown that, and changes to the taxi bylaw have enabled us to be able to put out an RFP. So we're actually in the process right now of crafting an RFP for the purpose of putting it out on the street and seeing what we get back in terms of submissions. So that then could end up with a TNC, or it could end up with one or the other taxi company, or it could end up going to someone who's starting something up.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Any others? I think we're ready to receive the item. Councillor Strand has moved receipt of the item. All those in favour? I didn't ask if there are any delegations, because I didn't think there were any, but I'll double check. Are there any? There are. Item number 5 is the bulk loose leaf collection service expansion. I think the report is self-explanatory. Are there any questions? Councillor Chisholm, you have a question?
Yeah, I think it was broken. Done better. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read the report, and it's an information report and throughout the town, and I understand where we're going with this, but I think there's some real issues on an operational side that we have to consider maybe as a separate report. I don't know, I'll ask for direction through Mr. Chair, and maybe not through the Budget Committee, but maybe through Council. We had an enormous amount of calls this year with respect to the leaf collection program, and the lack of, and I can understand why, the lack of not meeting schedules and so forth, and some were 2 or 3 weeks behind. What I'm suggesting, the leaf program, leaf pickup program, that we look at some best practices and look at the schedule that we prepare with respect to commit to that. If we can't meet those schedules, I think we're putting a bar up there that we can't reach. To look at also budget requirements for maybe for 2020, not 2019, I think it's late, but also staffing allocations and equipment allocation. I understand there's a conversion program, and it creates a lot of time and so forth. So those are the things I'd like to see happen above and beyond what this report is with respect to the operation, because we had a lot of negativity this year, and I understand with weather patterns and climate change and so forth, maybe we just have to be a little more creative in how we approach this. If you want to respond to this, that's fine, but through you, Mr. Chair, would it be feasible to ask for this report separate at Council?
I don't believe any extra request is required. As I understand it, in this report on page 36, you actually say that there will be another 2019 staff report dealing with this leaf collection already, and probably could respond to some of these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, correct. The report originally intended for later on in 2019 was to deal with when we would look at adding an additional collection service in the current expansion zones, and we could update that report to look at the operational service review of the leaf collection program and look at options for enhancement.
Very good. Are there any other questions on this item? Mary, you previously said something about... No, you're good? Okay. I have one very small question with respect to the report that's coming forward later on. In Area H, just north of Glen Ashton, there's a tiny little neighborhood that was built basically at the same time as Iroquois Ridge. And I've had a couple of complaints about, hey, how come not us? And I think a little bit hard for us to say why not them when they were built at the same time as the area south of them. I'm not talking about the entire Joshua Creek community because they're much younger by age. But in terms of that little neighborhood, I wonder whether we consider minor refinements to the boundary to try to be consistent.
Sure. Through Mr. Chair, certainly we can take a look at Area H and better define the age of the community in that area.
Yeah, it's just the area south of the pipeline, and like that's the dividing line of the community, not Glen Ashton. Okay. And so I wonder if we can consider that. There's like 3 streets basically. But, okay, thanks very much. So Councillor Elgar, I think you were in your seat. Thank you very much. If there's no other questions, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay. Members of the committee, that deals with the items on the agenda today. Just going forward, on Thursday this week, we have the delegation days. We have the delegation meetings. We have one at 9:30 a.m. and one at 7 p.m. We have the deliberations on January 22nd at 9:30 a.m. and then it goes to council on the evening at 7 p.m. I also have an open house this evening for members of the public who might be interested in asking questions in a non-formal kind of setting or providing feedback in a non-formal setting. I'd be happy to see people at that meeting as well. And that'll be here at Town Hall this evening at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience, your efforts today, and we'll see you at the next meeting. We are adjourned.